in this tutorial, I'm going to take you through how to create these conceptual form diagrams in our instance using Rhino, Illustrator, and Photoshop before bringing them into PowerPoint. So traditionally, a lot of these diagrams are white based, as you're seeing here. So you got darker color lines with color accents on a white background. I'll take you through how to do that, but I'm also going to take you through how to do the contrasting or juxtaposition diagram where it's white lines, white text on a black background, for no other reason other than just to give you a bit of an idea of the different options that you can find and different ways that you can explore and develop your diagrams into a language or a style that is uniquely your own. So let's begin in Rhino. So I've got my Rhino site file open at the moment, and the most important thing is to essentially develop your block and stack diagrams or your block and stacking model within Rhino itself in order to then produce the make 2D drawings, which you'll then export out as DWG and open into Illustrator. This component is going to take you quite a while to get your head around because you've got to now transcribe your sketches into formal block and stack models themselves. A couple of key commands that I'll take you through that will really help you on this journey are going to be scale 1D, set C-plane to surface, project to surface or project to C-plane, and then proper use of layer controls. So I've done some of this ahead of time, some of this I'm still yet to do, so I'll sort of walk through it with you as we go. This is quite a rough and ready tutorial, so it's not like I've scripted this out or anything like that, so I'm sort of developing this on the fly. So the first thing to do is, with your site model opened up, to create yourself a sketch layer of some sort. So I do have a sketch layer, and if I scroll underneath or orbit underneath, you can see I got a bunch of red lines on here, and I'll explain what they are shortly. But the point I'm getting at is you just need a layer to create where you can just sort of draw away on within your model without disrupting what you've already got. So just out of for completeness, I'm going to create a new layer. So I've got a new layer. I'm going to call this one Sketch 02. Okay, and again, I'm going to make that a red layer just so to make sure I can see any of the line work that I'm using. So if we look at the example that we saw before, we have diagrams that are showing essentially the massing of the entire site. Then we have one that looks at the height restriction or the 10-meter height restriction. Then we got other ones that look at setbacks, and then it goes into the actual form development of your building. So we can look at those individually and then look at the block and stacking options secondly and how they are diagrammed. So to begin with, we've got to take this curve, which this curve is our actual site boundary, and we want to project that down to a flat surface so we can extrude this up. Because if I was to click on these lines individually, so if I was to click on these curves, which are our site boundary, okay, and I go and extrude that, I get something that looks like this, which is okay, but it's an open extrusion. And I know that because when I click on it, I'm clicking on separate faces. The other thing too is that it's basically extruding those lines directly up in like a vertical fashion, which is probably not the best way to depict the actual fall of the land. More importantly, the most important bit is I cannot cap this mass. If I select all these elements and click on cap, and if I type in the command cap, nothing happens because it's actually an open extrusion. So I'm going to get rid of these. Okay, I'm going to go back. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on my sketch layer. So I'll double click on that layer to make sure that I got like the little tick there, the black tick next to it. So now I'm on that sketch layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this line again. I'm going to hold down Shift, making sure that I only select those curves. And it doesn't have to be perfect as long as I get most of them. It doesn't really matter. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, now with these curves selected, I'm going to use the command project to C-plane. Okay, now remember in Mac, my commands are on my left-hand side, but if you're on PC, your commands will be down here in the command bar, or it could be at the top of your screen in the command bar, but the process is exactly the same. With project to C-plane selected, I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to give me these options. do I want to delete the input objects? Which means, do I want to delete these current curves that are sitting on this, this surface, which is, remember, a topographical surface, so it's got curvature in all directions. We want to say no, we do not want to delete that, we just want to make a copy of those lines. So I'm just going to click on done, and you're going to notice down here, we now have those lines that are basically smushed out flat on the ground. But you can see that they're not red lines. Why? Because the original layer that these were on are on the curve layer, or the curves layer, or the site title boundary for the project. So if I turn those on and off on the original site file, you'll notice it's turning them off underneath as well. So what I need to do, another very common command, is I'm going to click on these lines individually. It's a little bit finicky, but we'll get there. Okay, so I've selected those curves, and I'm going to right click on Sketch 02, and I'm going to say change layer, change object layer. Click on that, and those curves now turn red. Now, why have I done that? It's so I can go right click on Sketch Layer 2. I'm going to say select objects. Okay, so it selects those lines, and I'm going to use the command isolate. Those that took my Rhino class last year know that I love to do this. If I'm working on something in particular, I just want to see that object, nothing else, because it's too much risk that I'm going to touch something else by accident. I'm then going to go to my top view, which for me is Command 1, but if you're using PC, it should be Control 1 if you set up your commands. And if you haven't set up your commands, then the easiest way to get to top view is to click on the little drop-down box here. I'm going to go Set View, and I'm going to say Top View. Okay, so there's our top view. Now, if I select all these lines, you're going to see that when I select them all, in the Properties window, it says 7 open curves. So somewhere in here, this curve is not actually closed, and that's not going to help us when we go to extrude this into a box. So what we can do is, there's two things we can try. Firstly, I'm going to select all the lines, and I'm just going to go Close Curve. Okay, Close CRV, and hit Enter. Okay, and you can see immediately something's broken here because it's essentially added little areas to close out these curves, and that's no good. So I'm going to go Control Z or Command Z, and I'm going to try again. All right, so let's actually look at these lines very closely and try and work out where exactly they're broken. So the first thing to do is let's join this curve and this curve. So I'm going to click on those two and type in join. Okay. Now that's now one line. You can see it's one continuous polyline. Let's go again. This one and this one, join. Ah, okay, straight away. Oh, did I join them? Let's double check. Join. Okay, so this tells me because these two weren't joining, there's something going on with this section here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this curve point, drag it back. I'm going to click on this line. Then I'm going to use my selection window from left to right. So click, move my hand, holding down my mouse until I get that point. So I'm just going to click on that point and just snap it to the end of that line. Okay. Now I'm going to do that again. Join. And now they are one continuous curve. So we've got two sides of the site. Let's keep going. So let's do this and this, holding down Shift, join. And it will say down the bottom here in the command bar, and it might say a few at the top, but it says here, we said the command is join. It says it was joining curves, and then it gave us the outcome. 2 curves joined into one open curve. Perfect. So they're now joined. Now let's go with the curve of the site, like the edge of the street, and I'll go these, and I'll go join, and again, it's been joined into one open curve. So we only have 2 more sections to go. So let's go again, join, unable to join curves. Okay, so there's something going on with this line. So I'll click on that, drag it back, and just drag it over until it snaps to the end. And then let's try that again. Join, and now it's one curve. Now, the reason why this is happening is because these little dots or these lines are overlapping each other, and they might be overlapping each other by like 1 millimeter. Remember, this site is to scale. This is like a full like 30 meters by 30 meters or whatever the site size is. So there could be like a couple of mil where it's actually the lines are overlapping each other, which is why you're getting this issue. Okay, so we have one complete curve. We have one more section to go. So I'm going to click on this and go join. All right, now we're done. So if I click on this, you can see in the properties window, it says close curve. We have a complete closed curve. So let's go back to our perspective view. So I'll go to here and I'll go set plane perspective. Okay. And now we can go extrude, curve, and I'm just going to drag it up. And I'm going to make sure my options, remember again on Mac, the options are on the side as buttons. On PC, the options will be down here in the command bar. And you just have to make sure that you have to say solid, you tick it, or in Windows, it will say solid equals yes or no. Just click on where it says yes or no, and it will flick it to the opposing toggle. Okay, so now this is a solid cut. I'm just going to project this up, say, let's say we go up 15 meters. So I'm going to type in 15,000 just to begin with. Okay, now we have like essentially a solid box that is our site profile. Okay, that's basically just our site just pulled up into an extrusion. Now I'm going to use the command show to bring everything back. Okay, and that's what you can see what we've got here. And I'm just going to drag this up a little bit to around about there. Okay, now what we will do is you want to then put this on its own layer. So you want to put that extrusion on its own layer because it is its own diagram. So think about this logically in terms of diagram structure. So the first diagram is just the massing of the site itself, which is this box here. So what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, set a view for ourselves. So I'm going to use the command called named view. Okay, name view. Hit enter, and this little window is going to appear for me, and I'm just going to dock it to the side here. All right, then what I'm going to do, this is an important step, I'm going to go click on my little drop down here and go set view, and I'm going to change this to an isometric view, from perspective to isometric, and I'm going to just click on any one of these, and you can see now all the lines are vertical and parallel. All right, and I'm just going to go something like this. I just want to make sure, a tip for you, you want to make sure you see the whole model in your viewport, okay, the whole model. I'm then going to click on this little icon here, the camera with the plus button, and I'm just going to call this diagram view, apply. So the benefit to this is it means that we can go back to our perspective view. So we can go back to perspective, we can orbit around, work on the model, do whatever we need to do. And then as soon as we want to go back to that view, I just need to double click on this and it goes back to that perspective view. Now keep in mind, now when I start orbiting around, I'm orbiting around in isometric mode. That's why the perspective looks a little bit funky. But for me, I've got a shortcut to change that view, which is Control P or Command P. If you took my class last year, you'll know that that just gets us back to the perspective view. And if we need to get back to the diagram view, again, just double click. You can see it updates up the top here to diagram view, go back to perspective view, Control P or Command P. All right, now what we need to do is we need to create, you can see down the bottom here, I've already got these diagram layers already here, but I'll do it again for argument's sake. So I'm going to create a new layer and I'm just going to call this diagram-01, and we will call this massing. All right, so again, I'm going to click on this massing object and I'm going to right click on diagram 1 and I'm going to say change object layer. So when it changes, it now changes to a gray because there is no color, but I will give it a color. So I'm going to give it like a yellow, and the color is for no other reason, just that I can recognize it. It doesn't really change anything structurally. Okay, so I can turn off that layer, and now we've got our first diagram essentially modeled. So if I double click on the diagram view, we've got here's our site, and when I turn on that layer, it's called diagram 1. There's our first diagram. That's like our massing diagram essentially. The site boundaries just extruded upwards. All right, so we have our first diagram built. What we're going to do now is we're going to make another layer, and we're going to call this one diagram-02 underscore, we're going to say height limit. All right, and let's make this one a blue layer. All right, now I'm going to turn back on my massing diagram, so my massing there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on diagram 02, and this time instead of saying change object layer, I'm going to say copy objects to layer. So I'll do that. Okay, and it looks like nothing happened. but now if I turn off my height limit, I still have my massing diagram. So they're essentially the same object copied on 2 different layers, because this one we're going to want to actually split to get that line that shows us the height. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the surface, so the actual surface of the topography, which we're seeing here. Okay, and we're going to use a command called OffsetSrf, not just offset, but OffsetSrf, surface. I'm going to click OK or Enter. And at the moment you see those arrows pointing down, it means it's going to offset that surface downwards. So if we just click on the surface, the arrows flick back upwards. And you can see in my command bar, I've got 10 meters or 10,000 millimeters already typed in. Okay, there's nothing else to do. And I'm just going to click on Done or hit Enter or Spacebar. Okay, there we go. Now, it's created that on the red layer because I'm still on the Sketch 02 layer, which is perfect. That's fine. And this looks pretty good because we've got the 10-meter height at the back of the building, and you can see it's right on the edge of where that site massing is, which is perfect. And it's leaving us enough room down here. So what we want to do is we're going to split these objects. So we're going to now use the command called split. And we're going to, it's then prompting us, again, follow along in the command bar. If you're ever confused about what to do next in the command bar prompts you. So down here for me, it doesn't say anything, but for you guys on PC, it will. But it says for me, select the objects to split. So we want to split this massing object, okay? And then it says press enter when done, or spacebar, okay? Now it says select the cutting object. The cutting object is this object here, or the offset surface that we just did. And we say enter, and it looks like nothing's happened. But if I then click on this surface, and I'm going to delete it because we don't need it anymore, you can see now these 2 objects are separated into 2 components, which is giving us this line here, which is what we need to show us the 10-meter height limit from the natural ground line up to the top of this massing. Okay, so if I go back to my diagram view, double click on that, we now have both diagrams done. We've got, there's our massing with the site limit shown as well. All right. Now, the next one is going to be my offsets, my boundary offsets. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently to how some of the examples that we've seen done. I think there's a better way that we could show this. So I'm going to click on New Layer, and I'm going to go diagram-03_setbacks. I'm going to use, for this one, a red pen as well. So I'm going to change the layer to red. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on, remember this this outline of the site that we use the ProjectToCPlane command for. Well, that's on our sketch layer and it's still showing, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to right click on, with those curves selected, okay, I'm going to right click on diagram 3, I'm going to say copy objects to layer. All right, so now it's copied. I'm going to double click on diagram 3, so I've got the black tick there, and I'm going to turn off the light bulb for sketch 2. So we still have this red line, but that's now because that red line, if I look at the properties, is on diagram 3, the setbacks. All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to isolate, and I'm going to go to my top view. And what we're going to do here is a really, really basic version of res code. Nothing is perfectly to scale, but it gives us an idea of what the setbacks are. So we know that this is our boundary line of our site. So I'm simply going to use the offset command, and I'm going to go offset 1 meter off the boundary, okay? And I'm going to hover my mouse on the inside of that curve, and you can see we get that next line. All right, we know that res code is another meter off the boundary. I think it's like 3.6 meters up or something like that. I think it's that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the process is the same. So I'm going to click on this line and offset it again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go offset, and this time I'm going to go this line on the outside, but I'm going to offset it 4 meters. All right, because that's where like around our top floor will be, somewhere around there. But I'm actually going to go one step further. I'm going to do an offset. So I'm going to click on the outside boundary. This is the actual title boundary, and I'm going to use offset again. But this time I'm going to type in 6,000 or 6 meters inwards. And that's because you're probably going to find when we work through this design development process, it's going to be between 4 and 6 meters is where our boundary edge is going to be for the front, for both Bordeaux Street and Riesling Street, because it's the average setback of the adjacent properties that are next to ours. So with each of these selected, the next bit is actually incredibly simple. So I'm going to go back to my perspective view. I'm going to rotate this around. The outside boundary itself, I'm going to delete that because it's not actually a setback. So I'm going to go delete. Then we're just going to extrude these curves. So I'm going to click on this one and I'm going to extrude this up. And I'm going to make sure that solid is turned off. So solid equals no, because I just want it, but essentially like a fence almost. And I'm going to extrude this up, say, I have no idea. Let's say 10,000. We'll extrude it up 10 meters. It might be too much, it might be too little. Then we're going to do the next curve. We're going to do the same thing again, but we'll extrude it up, say, 13,000 or 13 meters. Then we'll do the next one, and we'll extrude it up 16. And then the final one, we're going to do that again, and we're going to go 19. Okay. This is good. This is an issue you might run into. So I'm getting this error saying curves selected to extrude self-intersecting curves. All right, so what does that mean? I'm going to go back to my plan view. What it means is, you know how we have this curve on the outside of the building or the outside of the footprint? Every time this curve gets closer and closer, it's turning this into a tighter curve. And you can see now, if I zoom right in, look at what it's doing. It's essentially, this is what it means, it intersects itself. So what we're going to do is I'm going to select this and I am just going to use the command. Well, let's see if this works. I'm going to use the command rebuild. I'll give this a shot. And let's rebuild it from 100 points to say 15 points. And let's see what happens. Oh, no, that's not going to work at all. Okay. In that case, then we'll have to take the slower approach. I'm going to zoom right into this corner. Okay. I'm going to use my, so I've got to select the line. And when I select the line, all these little control points show. And I'm just going to go click from left to right. And I'm just going to hit delete. Okay. So we've just deleted a whole bunch of control points that were basically doing nothing for us. Because the control points on this curve and this curve are the same. Control points are the amount of dots you're seeing there. So let's go back to perspective and try that again. Let's go extrude curve. No problems this time. 19,000. All right, so we've got something that looks like this, essentially like a pyramid looking thing. But the reason for this is because what we're going to do in Photoshop, we're going to write, that's a 1 meter setback, that's a 2 meter setback, that's a 4 meter setback, that's a 6 meter setback, okay? So what we'll do is I'm going to select these, I'm going to type in show to bring everything back. And to be honest, I'm really happy with the heights that they're currently sitting at relative to our site. I reckon that's fine. So if I go back to my diagram view, yeah, that looks good. So that's showing us now, you can imagine we'll paint these in like a transparency sort of color, and that will be our different setbacks for the site. So that is now diagram 1, 2, and 3 done. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to start talking about how to actually form up your block and stacking models. So there's a couple of ways to do this. Essentially, you would have been doing this from your sketches, from your original sketches, and you should have a whole lot of sketches by now. I would expect you to at least have 100 to 200 block and stacking diagrams that you've sketched. The best way to do this, so I'm going to go back to my Sketch 02 layer, and I'm going to turn off my setbacks. Okay, so you can see again, we have diagram 1, which is our mass, diagram 2, which is our height limit, diagram 3, which is our setbacks. So I've done a couple of block and stacking options. I'll give you an example of what I've done just ahead of time so you can understand it. So I've got I've played around with some block and stacks here, and I've decided that probably the best approach is to use the height limit to my advantage and terrace the site essentially. So the first batch of apartments sit lower than the second batch up here. That's generally what I'm thinking. Then I tried to play around with it a bit more, what other shapes could I get? Then I started, liking, there was one that I liked, which was essentially as simple as you can get. So within the site setbacks, and I can turn on my setbacks to show you. So there's my setbacks there. Okay. I've just got basically 8 apartments, and they're very big apartments. So that one and that one is one apartment, that one and that one's another, that one and that one's another, and that's a penthouse. And then basically it repeats on the other side. Okay, that's essentially what I've tried to do. So that will be my first diagram. Then the second diagram, so I'm calling that diagram duality because it's essentially the same thing, just mirrored on both sides. Then I have the third option. So what I did is, let me turn off my topography. What I've done here is essentially start to articulate that. So I've added in a tiny bit of articulation there. I've set back the terraces a little bit so you've got a nice big balcony that wraps around. And I've offsetted, did a little bit of a void cutout here. So imagine the sun rises in the east. You get some eastern sun into this penthouse. And at the moment, there's no views from here, but at least there is some western sun, afternoon sun coming into this penthouse here. And you can imagine that these little square areas would be like your open living area. These are very big apartments. Currently, that penthouse is around 220 square meters, which is a massive 4-bedroom penthouse apartment. But then what I've done as well is essentially I've just flattened the block. So I've raised up where the building starts. So you can see here I've got like this almost retaining wall. And the idea is I could enter almost like stoop apartments in New York where you walk up a set of stairs and then you go to your front door. You walk up a set of stairs, you go up to your front door. And that retaining wall is quite high. If you're walking past here on the street, it's around 1.5 meters off the ground. It's quite steep. And then you'd come around to here and you can see the cutting that's occurring back here. So you just flatten this out, and it means that these apartments here, although you're at the back of the block, you still have this beautiful eastern sunlight in the morning that comes into your apartment. And you imagine that these would be beautiful green spaces. Okay. Notice as well, architecturally, they're just blocks. There's so much we can do still, but understand the assignment is just block and stacks. No architectural features at this point in time. These diagrams will develop as your design develops. Then what I decided to do is say, okay, well, I like this. So we've gone from having like duality to then duality with some articulation. And then I've decided, well, what if we just drop the front set of apartments and keep the back set a bit higher? So what you have now is this amazing opportunity where both your front and back penthouse both have access to those amazing city views. It also means that you can enter the building from street level, so there's no like hills to climb. Basically, it's very proportional relative to the street frontage. It means I can separate my entrances, and I'll show you that in a second, where essentially I've got an entrance over here. That's going to be against the wall. It's just showing as a block at the moment, but essentially a penthouse entrance would be through here into the lift shaft and the stairwell. But then your front apartments would end up looking something like this, where you have a bigger expansion void area in here for your other apartments, particularly for these 3 apartments where you'd enter through like a lobby into your apartment building itself. It also means that the fire stairs are in one location. So what you can't see here is the garage, or the basement entrance will be here as well. And as it goes underground, it means that you'll have access to the lifts, the core lifts, in one location for all the apartments. Again, architecturally at the moment, it looks like it's quite simple, but when you see my sketches that I've been developing, you could put almost any type of facade on this and dramatically change its appearance quite easily. Now, I didn't mind the idea of my original design where I blocked them out and separated them into different buildings, and there's nothing wrong with doing that at all. All I'm doing is I've just done something quite simple just so I can diagram it for you guys, and it's easy to understand. Okay? So with that in mind, let's take a little bit of a closer look on actually how to build these block and stacking models. In my opinion, the easiest way to do these block and stacking models really begins just by creating a box and then going to your plan views and pushing and pulling from there. So to create a box, literally I'm just going to use the box command and just draw something like this, okay? It is a safe bet that to use a box that's going to be around, if you can get them to 3.5 meters, it means you're going to have more than enough room in terms of like your height restrictions. Really, your floor to ceiling is going to be somewhere between 2.7 to 3 meters. And then, if you add in another 0.5 meter for services and a structural slab, you're being very generous. And so it's always better to start with a higher floor to floor and then compress it down, than to do the opposite, have your floor to floor be too low and then need to find some way of increasing it later on, because usually what happens there is your architectural interior will suffer. You'll have to drop your ceiling heights, which is definitely an undesirable approach. Okay, so with this box selected, remember to center your orbiting axes around an object. Click on the object and then the ZS command, zoom select, and then enter. And then that object becomes the center point of your rotation. Remember how frustrating that is. If I come over here and try and orbit around it, it's terrible. If I just go ZS, enter, it now becomes the center point of my rotation. Okay, ZS, and in my case, I like using spacebar, so spacebar instead of enter. All right, now, in order to change this on the fly to the right height, best command you can use here, there's two. One of them is just called scale 1D. So if I type in scale, you'll see there's a couple of different versions. You have scale, scale 1D, scale 2D. Scale 1D means obviously one direction, scale 2D, two directions. Scale means in all three directions at once. So scale 1D is fantastic. So I'll click on scale 1D. I'm going to start in one corner. I'm going to move my mouse up to the top where the top of the box is, and you can see at the very bottom of my screen, down here, it's showing that the height of that box is currently 9.8 meters or 9.7 meters. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to drag my hand down, and I'm just going to type in 3,500 and enter. And now we know that box is 3.5 meters high. All right. Now the same thing occurs in other directions. So if I click on the box and I use scale 1D again, I can click on one end of the box to the other. Currently the box is 22 meters long. That is huge. Let's go back to say like, I don't know, 14,000. So 14 meters long. And then I'll do the same thing. Click on the box, scale 1D, click from the bottom corner across. It's currently 12.9 meters. Let's make that say 8 meters. So that's pretty, that's pretty generous in terms of actual sizing. So this is the general rule of thumb, or the general way you can start to get your areas pretty quickly. So I think I said it was 8 meters by like 14 meters, so something like that. So it means that this box here is already 112 square meters. And we know how big our apartments, somewhere between 140, 160 will be a nice 3-bedder. So you could continue to change these numbers. You could just keep using scale 1D and you can make it slightly narrower, slightly longer. Or the other thing you can do, in my case, what I've done is I've chosen to have apartments which stem across 2 levels. So that would be one apartment and then the penthouse on top, essentially. It's completely up to you. But with those blocks essentially built up, what I would suggest you do is you kind of have a few different options next to each other. So you might have this option, and then you might say, oh, that's another tip for you. So when I click on it with the Gumball selected, if this little thing is not showing with the blue, red, and green arrow, that is called your Gumball. And it's a great tool because when you'll remember this from my class last year, when you move it on that arrow, when you click and drag that arrow, it moves it on that axis. It doesn't allow you to move it in any other direction. It's fantastic. But if it's not on, click on an object and click on this little thing down here, the little button that says Gumball, and it will turn it on. Then a really quick way to make a copy is to click on the Gumball, click on or like hold down your red arrow or your green arrow and hold down Alt on your keyboard, or on Macs it's Option, and it creates a copy just by doing that. All right, so let's try this again. Let's go scale 1D, and how long is the apartment? It's currently 14. Let's say we make the apartment 16 meters long, and instead of 8 meters wide, we'll make the apartment say 6.5 meters wide instead of 8. And so, just doing your rough calculation, 6.5 times 16, 104 square meters is the current floor area of this box here. Or times 2, we now have a 208 square meter apartment. So again, that's a very generous 4-bedroom apartment. Now, what I would do from here is simply go to my top view, and I would change my view to wireframe mode, which is essentially like AutoCAD mode, and then just click on these boxes and move them around. And because you've already done one of your diagrams, if I turn on my diagram 3, which is my setbacks, I'm going to get these lines here. And it may not be perfect, but it does help me sort of go, oh, okay, well, I know that is 1 meter. That first red line's 1 meter, that's 2 meters, that's 4 meters, and that's 6 meters. And you can see here, again, relative to the other houses on the street, somewhere around 6 meters is going to be a suitable setback. So I'm going to say, all right, well, that's one apartment there. Holding down Alt on my keyboard and then clicking and dragging on the red arrow, I'm going to get another apartment. Clicking and dragging again, I'll get another apartment if I click on the green. And if I want to rotate it, I can just click on the blue arc, and you can type in an angle. In this case, I'm going to say 90 degrees. Flips it over, and I'm just going to keep using these gumball arrows. It makes it really easy to move it around. Okay, and then what I can do as well is if I want to, I'll see if I can do this purposely. So this will happen a lot, okay? So I'm going to go to my 3D view, I'm going to turn off my setbacks, and I've got something that currently looks like this. So they're kind of buried in the ground, which is not really what we want. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on these ones, and I'm just going to move them up a little bit. I'm just eyeballing it. I've got no idea how much I'm moving them up. That's just, that's good enough. But what I am going to do now is I'm going to go back to my top view, and I'm going to turn this back to wireframe mode. And let's say that I want this box here to sit next to this box, okay? Let's say I want this one to butt up against this box here. Like I want it to essentially do this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the box, okay? Now, the reason why I'm getting two extrusions is because there's two stacked on top of each other currently. So I'll select, I don't care which one. And I'm just going to use the move command. So M for move, enter. And I'm going to click on this corner and I'm going to move it to this corner. So it's now snapping to that object, and I'll say okay. Now, when I go back to my 3D, you're saying it looks like this, okay? But I might have wanted it to move to the top of this box, okay? If I wanted that, I need to make sure that I use move in 3D and snap it up there, all right? Now, sometimes the opposite happens, where when I move the box across like this, I actually, for some reason, it will automatically snap to here. And when you're like, actually, I wanted it to be down here somewhere. That is very annoying, and I guarantee you it's gonna happen to you. So, a tip for you when that does happen. When you're in plan view, there is this little object under O snaps, you have this little button called project, and that is going to be your friend. Because what that means is that you can only move things in this view. It's not going to snap up and down vertically in this view. So if I'm in plan view, if I'm in perspective, with project currently ticked on, watch what happens. When I go to move, see I cannot click on these corners. The line I keep getting like this white line, and that white line is basically going down to the C plane, which again, that C plane is underneath the topography at the moment. It's on the ground. So when I click on it, you can see I'm only able to move it in that vector. I cannot snap it like to the end of an object. I can't like snap it to the end of this house, for instance, because I'm in project mode. But if I do that again, turn off project and use the move command and then click on this, I can move this anywhere. So you see now I've like moved it to the top, like in line with like the eave of that house. So that is going to be a very powerful tool for you called project. All right. The last, what I will do now is I'm just going to continue making a few more adjustments. So I'll take this. Okay. I'm going to go back to my plan view. I'm going to turn this into wireframe mode. I'm going to make sure I select both of these. And I'll create another one there. And another one here. Another one here. I'll rotate that 90 degrees. Like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use scale 1D. I'm going to click on one end of the box, the other end of the box, and then just drag it out. I might make it the same width as the three of those. So I've got something that looks like this, which is not great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on these boxes, and I'm just going to drag them up a little bit. Okay. And then these ones here, I'm going to drag them up a little bit further, so they sort of stack like this. All right, now we haven't done a penthouse yet, but if you want to know whether you're going over the height limit, guess what? That's what you got your height limit diagram for. And all I need to do is click on this top bit and type in height. And now this line here is essentially my guideline. So when I go to I'll show you a finished example. you can see here, here's my final design that I'm going to go with, and you can see that it's underneath that 10 meter height limit. So I'm all good. I know this is going to work, and it works particularly well because of the terracing effect. Okay. And then when I want to bring back the top of this, the cap of this diagram, I just type in the command show, and it brings back the top. Okay. So I'm going to turn off my height limit. And then the last thing I might want to do, let's pretend that I want to bridge this box to this box. For some reason, I want to bridge these across. Another really cool command. On Mac, it is Command and Shift. Okay, on PC, I think it's Control and Shift. I think it is, or it's Control and Options, one of the two. But what that allows me to do is actually just select a face of a box. Now that I've selected, because when I just click on it, see, I'm just clicking on the whole box. No matter where I click on this object, I can't select a face or a corner. It's just selecting the whole object. But when I use Command and Shift or Control and Shift, I can select just that face. And I can then drag it if I want to, like this. Or if I want to be more precise, I can just use my Move command. So I click on Move and I just click once there, and I can finish it here. And now I know I've got this perfect bridge where these two objects seamlessly interact with each other. And now I've got this cool effect where you've got like a walkway that goes underneath the building into like a courtyard area or something like that. Pretty cool effect. Okay. And then I might do the same thing here. I might go, well, actually I want this face and I want to bridge this across. So I'm gonna click here, come across to there, and I've got something that looks like this. So I'm not perfectly sitting above it, but it is kind of like a terracing effect. Okay. So that's as simple as we get. But let's say I wanted to add some articulation into this object. So you'll see in my example, I've got something that looks like this, where I've got like these cutouts in the box, in the building. So the best way to do that, let's say that I wanted like, I've got this bridge here, and let's say I wanted to put like a void through it because I wanted like a tree to grow through there. Don't know why, but I might. I'm gonna go to my top view, and I'm going to go to wireframe mode so I can see through the box, okay? And I'm just going to use, instead of a box, I'm going to use a cylinder. I'm just going to click once, make it a bit bigger, and then click. Doesn't look like anything happened, but if I go back to 3D and turn to shaded mode, okay, and I go underneath, there's my little cylinder. And now, using the Gumball, I'm just going to click on this blue little dash line and just click and drag to make it a bit bigger. And then I'm going to drag this through that bridge. All right, now this applies whether the box was rectangular or circular or whatever. But the tip for you, it must go through the entire shape. I can't just do it like this, okay? And I'll show how to do it if it's an object on the edge, okay? So let's do that. And I'm just going to drag this out to here. So I've got a copy. And I'm going to use the command BooleanDifference. Okay, BooleanDifference basically means subtract one object from another. Go okay, and it's going to say which surface do I want to subtract from. I want to subtract from this box here. Hit enter. What object do I want to subtract with? This cylinder. Hit enter, and I now have like this cylinder hole through that object there. Okay, now if the object was just intersecting with the building, I'll go back to my top view. It must intersect and still have some object left on the outside. If I do something like this, I might get an error. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to do something like that. And let's try that again. I'm going to go BooleanDifference, this object, enter that object, and there we go. Got like a cheese, like a Swiss cheese looking thing happening there. Okay, so that's BooleanDifference. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how to actually terrace this site and make this site a bit flat, okay? So currently we've got the original surface of the topography of the site that we're dealing with. And so what I'm going to do here is we want to make sure that we duplicate this so we don't wreck the original version, because the original version is still really important for us for our diagramming. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to go, firstly, actually before I do that, we want to click on these boxes here and we want to associate them to a block and stack model. So you can see down here, I've got block and stack options 1 and 2. Okay, I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to go option 3. Okay, then I'm going to click on these boxes here, these extrusions, holding down shift, right click, change object layer, they turn gray, then we've got an option 3 now. So there's my first option, there's my second option, there's my third option. I've still got to add penthouses. Okay. Now, while I'm on this option, I'm going to click on this this topography. All right, and I am going to copy object to layer to option 3. Okay, so I do that, and I get looks like nothing's happening, but if I click on it, I've got 2 surfaces now, the purple one and the gray one. So I'm going to now, underneath the original 3D site survey, I'm going to hide topography, and I've got just this gray one like this. That's important because we're going to edit this one. So how do we edit our cut and fill? Well, the best thing to do is on our sketch layer, we still have this nice closed curve, of our site. And I'm going to isolate it, okay, like so. And I'm going to use the command extrude curve. And I'll make it solid. Oops, again, something like that. All right, and then I'm going to type in show, and it looks something like this. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this, and this is a lot of eyeballing that I'm doing at the moment, so it's not perfect, but I'm going to eyeball it. I'm going to move my site, be something like this, okay? So it's sticking out of the ground at the front, but at the back, it's a little bit sunken in, okay, like that. I'm going to now use a different command. Okay, I'm going to use Boolean to objects. So I click on that, and it says select 2 objects to Boolean, this object and that object. Okay, so now the object turns red. Oh, I'll do it again. This object and that object, and then enter. And now what's happened is it's essentially done like a cut. So now it's cut away the back part of the site, but only the back part. See, about halfway down, the site now continues to fall down naturally as it did. But what it does allow you to do is to take these boxes at the back, although this one's not a good example, but this one is, and put it to the correct height. And again, I'm just eyeballing it because it doesn't have to be perfect. But we now know we might have like this nice entranceway for these apartments that is flat here. And then we have a lower part of the ground down here where you can have your street frontage down here. Okay. Now, if I wanted to terrace this, what I would do is, let's go again. I'm going to click on this object down here, the curves. I'm going to go extrude curve, make it whatever height, click and drag this. But this time, I actually have to split this box. Okay, because if I want to terrace this bottom bit and make it flat, what's going to happen is it's going to make the back bit even deeper. So if I want to make it flat at the front of the property, watch what happens. So I'll go Boolean to objects. I'll go this object and the topography, and this happens. So it looks good at the front because now the front of the properties are now sitting on flat land, but at the back, I've now cut away even more. So look how deep that retaining wall is. That retaining wall is, 5 meters deep. That's way too deep, okay? It was better when the site was terraced. So what I'm going to have to do is go to my top view, okay? This is really, this is pretty easy to do. I am going to then just draw a line. I'm going to change this into wireframe mode. I'm going to draw a line through the middle of the site, so somewhere around here, and just draw. Okay, so that's just a plain line. I'm going to go to my perspective view and click on the box. And I'm going to go isolate. Okay, change this back to shaded mode, and I now have a line, a red line, and the red box. And I'm going to go to my top view, and I'm going to use the command split. I'm going to split this object, enter, and I'm going to split it with this line. I'm going to say enter, click on this side, delete, go to my 3D, and this is what I've got. I've got like an open box now. So in order to close that box up, I'm just going to use the command cap. Okay, and cap makes that box nice and closed again. Now the beauty to this is, if I go show, it turns back on the site. Okay, it turns everything on, but you can see now what we can do is we can terrace this bottom bit, and it means that our top bit can still remain higher than our bottom bit. So our top floor, or our top part of the site, is sitting on a different height to the bottom. So let's go again. Let's go boolean to objects. I'm going to boolean this mass with the site, hit enter, and you can see now we've got like a step change in the site. So you have like a lower part of the site, then an upper part of the site. And generally speaking, it's probably a good idea if I bring these back to here, and then what I might do is I'm going to use scale 1D, and I'm going to go from here to here, back to there, something like that. It's not too bad. And then I'm going to use this, and I might bridge this across entirely. Something like that. Okay? So that's if I wanted to terrace the site, using simply an extrusion and using the command boolean to objects. Now, the other way I could do it is we could build the site upwards. So I'm going to keep clicking Control Z to go back. Okay. All right, so back to here. What I can do is just do something like this, where, so if I move this, we've got the site as originally was, nothing changed, it's still on its fall. And what I might do this time is just with that extrusion, bring this up so it looks something like this. Okay, so essentially we've got a platform that the house is being built on, and what that allows us to do, which is going to be much harder, but essentially take all these and move them up so they're sitting on this platform, basically. So almost like, again, there's a retaining wall. At the moment, that's quite high. In fact, it's probably way too high. If we look at our height limit, we've only got 2 floors, and we'll probably be well above the 10-meter mark. So if I was to like add another floor like that, that's our penthouse, and then I turn our height limit, you can see that we're right on the edge of that height limit already. Okay, so it's not like you can't do that where you have like something like this. The advantage to this, it means that basically your whole project can be on one level. So when you cut the back, you can still do the Boolean difference up here, where you cut the back of the property. But what it means is that you can sort of cut the back, and instead of terracing it and cutting the front, you can essentially cut the back, fill the front, and then you'll end up with something that looks like this. Just give me 1 second. I'll turn off that option. Something that looks like this. So I've cut the back of the property, but I've raised the front of the property. And like I said, the advantage to this means that the entire building can be at one level. But I do think that's a disadvantage, because the advantage of doing something like this where it's terraced is that your back penthouse gets a view as well as your front penthouse. Okay. It also means that your back aspect gets some nice natural morning light without being obstructed by being too deep in the ground. If you're too deep in the ground, the lower you go, you will easily miss your 10-meter height limit, but the shadowing, the overcasting from the neighboring properties and any neighboring trees, plus the depth of this retaining wall, means that these grassy areas, these garden, private open spaces would be quite dark. So to create our block and stacking diagrams, it's actually a really easy process. So before I do my conceptual form diagrams, I'm going to show you how to do the block and stack option diagrams. So in my layer structure, I have block and stack options, and then option 1, which is currently what's shown, as you can see there. And this is like probably a medium density. There's 10 apartments here. If I wanted to, I could go to my second option. That's slightly more dense. And then we've got like the final version, the one that I actually want to go with, which is 8 apartments in total, but they're 8 very large apartments. So I'm going to turn back on option 1, and the process is the same for all your diagrams for block and stacking. So I'm going to right click on that layer and say select objects, and then I'm going to use my favorite command, isolate. All right, now that's isolated, I want to go to a view that I can use for diagramming. So I'm going to go to my diagram named view, double click on that, and my view gets locked away straight away. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select my 2 penthouses, which are made up of 2 objects each, and I'm just going to drag this up above the screen until I see a gap between the 2 different levels. And so you'll see why we do this shortly. But what I have here is this top and bottom apartment. That's one apartment. top and bottom, or bottom and top, ground and level 1, that's a second residence. Ground and first floor, third residence, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and then 9, 10 for the penthouses. If I wanted to do if I had designed a higher density option and all 3 levels were different dwellings, or perhaps even in this case, maybe it's apartment 1 is both of those units next to each other rather than vertically, and then that would be a second dwelling. If that was the case, what I would be doing is something like this. And it doesn't matter that I'm turning my view around because I can always go back to it. I would just drag this down, and I drag it down to about here. Basically, oh, I missed one. Basically until I have, when I go to my diagram view, oops, hang on, I need to do that again because I cooked the selection. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, okay. Now I'll go back to my diagram view, double click, and just drag that down until, again, I see a gap between my ground level and my first floor, and then there's a gap between my first floor and my penthouse. That's how I do it. And I remember to double click to get back into that view, so it's really important. And then what we would do is then make 2D this, but for argument's sake, I'll do my diagram like this because this is how this design's intended. So the residences are stacked on top of each other in terms of, like, that's one apartment, that's the second apartment, third, and the fourth. First, that way you get a ground level and a first floor level, and then the penthouses are separate. So now that I have this view, I want to double click my diagram view so I'm locked in. I'm going to select everything in the view, and I'm going to use the command make 2D. Now, when I hit make 2D, this same window comes up with you using PC or Mac. And I want to make sure that I name these. So in yours, you might have a layer name that just says make 2D, but I've changed the layer name to say block and stack diagram. Then what I've got is the projection is going to be the view. The tangent lines are going to be showing. You can see this little, basically this little preview window here. If I turn off tangent lines, you can see those lines disappear. Hidden lines, I want to make sure they're kept on, and then the silhouette lines I'd like to keep on as well, and we're going to group the output for now, but I'll end up ungrouping them later on. So I'm just going to go apply, all right, and it looks like nothing's happened, but I'm just going to use ZS on my keyboard, hit enter, and then you can see I've got like this, these drawings sitting down on the ground. So I'm going to go to my plan view, that's better, and I'm just going to drag this off to the side somewhere. Okay, now this looks like a ripe old mess at the moment, but this is where the most important bit comes into these diagrams. You must take your time and sort out these layers appropriately. And these objects are currently grouped, so we'll have to ungroup them, we're going to have to trim, we're going to have to split lines, all sorts of stuff here, but it will be worth it in the end. So in my, really important now, at the, where is it? Okay, so down here I now have block and stack diagram as a layer. And then I've got like these hidden curves down here. So if I turn those off, you can see straight away how clean that looks. It looks like I've got like a solid object. But I do want those hidden curves because they're going to come in handy later on. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up some of these lines because these were made up of multiple boxes where really, in order to signify one residence, it should be sort of one continuous object. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to turn on all the lines, but what I am going to do is change the color. So for my hidden curves, I'm going to make this, a light gray, okay? And I'm going to do the same thing here. All right, now it looks like nothing changed in these lines, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I go select objects. Okay, so I'm going to select the objects, so I've got my hidden lines and my curves. I've right-clicked and gone select objects, and I'm going to make sure in my properties window, here it says the display color is custom. I want it to be by the layer, and when I do that, you can see now those lines are like a light gray. Okay, and that's just going to be helpful to understand, what we're working with here. So what I want to do is I want to click on these groups, both of these, and I'm going to use the command ungroup. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this line here I want to delete. This line here, if I delete it, I'll end up with something like this, and that's not going to work for us. So what I am going to do is just, like in AutoCAD, use the command trim. So enter, select both those lines, click, and then remove. And now you can see it looks like this is one large object. I need to do the same with this hidden line down here because I want this to look like one continuous mass, not as in like a cube and a rectangle has been stitched together. So I'll go trim, enter, and I will trim those as well. So now this looks much cleaner. You have these gray lines, which will be dashed lines that are hidden, and then the outside of this box, this looks like sort of one sort of L-shaped mass, okay? And that's one penthouse. Now, I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side now. So I'm gonna click on this object and that object, and I'm gonna ungroup them and do the same thing again. Trim, select, get rid of those, okay? This line here, delete, this line here, delete, and that's much better. So now I've got these two masses that are my penthouses, okay? Now, as for these down here, we need to be a bit more, I guess, sensitive about how we do these, because we do have like masses behind hidden lines, like masses in the foreground that are behind hidden lines where perhaps we don't want to see hidden lines in that instance. So I'll give you an example. So let's say, first things first, I think we need to get rid of these lines across the middle, or we need to put them on another layer, because remember, if we want to change the line style here inside of, say, Illustrator, it has to be on another line. So at the moment, this block and this block look like they're two different residences, when really I want it to look like one residence. However, if I do this, so if I ungroup this, and I just click on that and remove it, I'm not sure whether that's going to give me the look that I want. Maybe it is just sort of one big cube. But what I could do as well is if I want, put this on another layer and give it a faint line. That way you can sort of see, you know, that this is the ground level and that's the second level. So the idea is, or ground and first level. So you can see that they are the same residence, but they are split by a level. So if I was going to do that, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to create another curve line. So under the block and stack, I have visible curves. You have the silhouette curve, you have just standard curves, and then I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call this level curves. All right, and I might give that, just so I know for sure, I'm going to give it like a blue. All right, and again, I'm going to have to click on that line, and I'm going to have to change its layer. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that I change this to be by layer. So then I know. In fact, I'm going to select all of these lines here. And I'm just going to make sure that in the properties window that the display color of these lines is by the actual layer. This will save us from going through that process again and again. All right, now I've still got my dash line here and the rest of that looks okay. But now this one I need to ungroup and I need to click on this curve and this curve. And again, I'm going to right click on level curves and say change object layer, like so, okay? So again, that blue line will end up being like a fainter line after the fact. But there are areas where, you know, I don't want this essentially to occur. So it is showing me hidden lines behind other objects that are in the foreground, and I'm not sure whether this is going to actually look good or not. So what I mean by that is like you've got like ground level 1, and then behind them you've got like ground and level 1. But the ground is showing these dashed lines behind this mass. And in this instance, I may not want to show that. So I need to go ungroup, and I need to select these lines. And see there, if I delete it, that's not going to work. I need to just trim it here. So I need to go trim, and I need to do that. Then I'll select this line, and that line, and that line. So this might look a little bit clearer now. So you are still seeing these gray dash lines behind, but you've now got the mass of these apartments that are sitting in front of these block of apartments. So it still gives like some depth perception. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Now, just to speed up time, I'm just going to select them all and go ungroup. But you just have to be very careful about what you're actually playing with here. And perhaps to make this a little bit easier, the hidden lines might change from a light gray to say like a magenta. That may not be the best color here. Maybe an orange. That way I can just tell, I know that these orange lines are the dash lines. Now I can also change the line type too from like continuous to say like a dash line itself, and that may help as well, but these dash lines are really hard to sort of see until we get into Illustrator. But what this does done now is you can see again, this model here in the foreground, I need to get rid of some of these lines. So I'm just gonna go through. I can't do that. I need to trim that line, so trim. And that line is a whole line, that's a whole line. This one, if I delete it, that's not going to work. I need to trim it. Like so, okay? And then this one over here is a little bit more messy and cumbersome. What's that line? Okay, so that line does not need to exist because that's the back of this massing. So that can go, that can go. That has to be trimmed from back here, so trim, like so, that's better. And okay, I think that one's now, that's now done. But I do need to put these on the level curves layer, change object layer, because I might want to see that or not. So I can turn them off if I like and it looks like that. But I think I'm going to keep them on as a faint line. So I'll continue on with this. This one's going to be a little bit tricky. I'll delete that. These will have to be trimmed. That can go. That can go. That can go because it's behind this box here. You have to use a, it's a little bit tricky. You have to sort of visualize things, but it will come as you're going through this. It will make sense. So that has to go. And then these two have to be trimmed. Yep, I think we're good. And then these will go to my level curves. All right, now, last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in some extra lines here that sort of show where essentially the model was exploded from. So I'm going to use another hidden curves layer, and I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call this one exploded lines, and I'll make this red just for argument's sake. Make sure I'm on that layer, double click, and I'm essentially just going to sort of like CAD draw of him. I'm just going to go a line from here down to about there, another line from there to about there, another one like that, and then another one like that, and then the same thing over here. But this time I'm going to make sure I skip the actual box. It doesn't look like it's going to be that good right now, and then here I'm just going to draw down to something like that. But I need to make sure that I trim that line and same here, like that. So it doesn't look like much at the moment, but you'll see when we dash those, it will look like it's basically been in a like a box and it's just being pulled upwards. This is if you wanted to do like exploded block and stack diagrams. Now with this done, I'm pretty confident that everything is showing as it needs to. It may not, but we just have to be flexible and it'll be a bit of trial and error. So with this in mind, I'm just going to select it all and I'm going to use the command export. And I'm going to export this, for me, I'm just going to export to my downloads folder. And I'm going to call this block and stack -01. And I'm going to say this is a DWG file. And I'm going to say export, and I'm just going to use the default schema. Doesn't really matter. All right, then that's pretty much done. So the next thing to do now is to go into Illustrator and open up this file. Okay, I've now opened up Illustrator, and I need to go open that file. So I can either make a new canvas or just open the file. I'm just going to go open file, and I'm going to go to my block and stack, and I can see that here. All right, block and stack DWG. I'm just going to say open. It's going to say, what would I like? What size do I want it to be? Original size or scale to fit the artboard? I don't actually know what my artboard size is. So I'm actually just going to say scale to fit the artboard, and we'll see what this looks like. And it's not too bad. So in Illustrator, the commands are basically the exact same as Photoshop. So you know, for me, zoom on a Mac is Option and scroll in and out. On PC, I think it might be Alt and scroll in and out. And then pan is like holding down your space bar and clicking around. It's not too dissimilar. I got a couple of extra commands that I've got, but it's relatively easy to move around. But really, look, the only thing we need to look at here is a couple of very simple commands. Firstly, I want to change my layers. So I'm going to go to my layers, and I can see now when I turn on and off these layers here. So the first one is clearly the silhouette layer, because when I turn off my next layer and I turn on my silhouette, we get just the outside. And it's not great. It's not perfect, the silhouette layer. I don't think it's that good, actually. The second one looks fine. That's my actual lines. Then I've got my layers that are for my level curves, the blue ones. I've got the actual hidden lines, okay? And then I've got my exploded lines as well. So to go through this is pretty easy. As I'm turning these on and off, I can essentially click on these buttons on the other side, and these little circle buttons basically select all objects on that layer. So let's start with an easy one, and if we go with like our dashed lines, which are like our actual hidden lines, so I'll click on that circle, and if I click this little arrow here, you can see all of those lines are now selected. All of them are called splines. Then I'm going to go to my properties, and I'm essentially just going to change the layer or the line type here. So I'm going to change the color from, where are we? To like a gray. So I'm just going to go to not a gradient. Okay, I'm going to go RGB. What's spot color? No. And I might make that, say, like, I'll make it 100, 100, 100 for like a gray line. Say okay. All right, and then I'm going to change the width of that line. And then if I zoom in, you can see those lines have changed color, but not enough for my liking yet. So I'll click on those lines, go back to properties, and I'm going to change the line thickness, and I'm going to change the size of the dash line. So I'll make like the dash, let's say 10 point, and then a gap of 2 points, and let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good, but we can probably work that again. So maybe make the dash or gap 5 point. Okay, so when I zoom out, now it looks something like this, and we've got those dashed lines showing as we want. Now, that size is going to matter when we bring this into Photoshop. So I do want to know what size my artboard actually is. So if I want to see that, I can click on this little object here. It looks like a crop tool, and it shows the artboard as it currently stands. And it's quite large, because if I go to like 100%, it looks something like this. So I'm pretty well zoomed in. So I just want to double check that I've got the right size. View. Okay, so properties of the artboard. Okay, so the artboard's currently 1920 by 1080, so a standard HD window. Actually, that's a good size. We can play around with that. So basically what that means is whatever line types or like line weights we're using here, I'm pretty confident that we're going to get a good result when we put this into Photoshop. But let's keep working away. So go back to layers, and I'm going to go to my, let's go to the hidden lines. I still want to play around with again. So I'm going to go back to my properties. I'm going to make those lines a bit lighter. I'm going to make them a 0.25. And how do they look now? They're going back to being solid. That's annoying. We go to here, properties, stroke, make them a dashed line still, but it's a dashed line that's 0.25. They're squared off. and it's probably hard for you to see, but if I click on these, they actually round off the edge, the very edge of the actual line. They sort of round off versus like squaring them off. I'm going to keep them as, I'll keep them as rounded off. And that looks good. I'll come back, and it looks something like that now. Not too bad, but I might lighten up that gray a little bit more. So I'll go back to here, go back to my properties, change the color. I want to add a color, and I'm going to say, maybe we'll go 200, 200, 200 for a lighter gray. And that's better. That's much better. So you can barely see them now. Okay. Then what we'll do, let's go back to layers, and we'll take our just our block and stack lines in totality. So that's this second layer. Click on that, go to my properties, and let's go and make that like a black line. So I'll go back to here, double click on this one, and just make them all 0, 0, 0. All right, because we've made a new color for the gray, so we've got the black now. I'm going to make that line type a little bit thicker. I might make it like a 2-point, and you can see immediately how different that looks when it looks like that. Now I can also like edit these lines individually. Like if I want to, edit these lines and I want to make these ones internally a bit thinner, I can do that one by one. It's just a bit slow, but it can be done. And what I might do actually is I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to change this to properties. I'm going to make this a 1-point line, okay? But what I'll do is go back to my layers, and you'll see now when I turn on my silhouette layers and I select those, if I go back to my properties, I can make those nice and thick, like a 3-point, and you can see what that looks like now. But it's not quite complete because some of the lines got broken. Because a silhouette line just follows these lines around the outside of the building, but because these lines were deleted, it's not showing it as like one single silhouette. So for instance, with these ones, it's easy. I can just select this line and bump it up to 3 points, and now I've got like one continuous silhouette around the outside with the thinner lines on the inside. Same here, I can click on this one, make that a 3-point, it looks something like that. But you can see how in some instances this works, in some ways it doesn't. I need to make those two, that one and that one, a thicker line. Like that, so the silhouette follows around that box. Basically what that means is I need to change these ones as well to a 3-point. So you can see what I'm trying to do now. Make that 3-point. That's better. Yeah, nice. That's actually pretty much what I want. Now, go back to my properties. I can turn off my exploded lines, and right now my block and stack diagram looks something like this, and you can just see the faint gray lines that show us the internals of that diagram. Okay, and in this instance I reckon those gray lines now are probably a little bit too light, but let's just wait and see, because I've got a couple of ideas here on what we could do. Now I'm going to go to my exploded lines. I'm going to select those. I'm going to go back to my properties. I'm going to change the color. I'm going to make a new color. So I'm going to go to this plus icon, and this time I'm going to make these gray, but not as gray. So I'll make them say like 100, 100, 100, and say okay. And then I'll change the stroke to being a dash line. I'll make the gap similar, and I'll make the line weight 0.1, and it looks something like this. So now you're seeing how they're being dragged up from the ground floor, or from the second floor. The last one to do is my, where is it? The levels layer. So can you see now when I turn off those, I've got those level layers. If I turn those off, they do look probably more like, one singular apartment, like the top and the bottom, the top and the bottom. But I do want like a faint line to show that it is across 2 levels. So I'll turn that back on. I'm going to select those objects. I'm going to go back to my properties. I'm going to change it to a light line, like a 0.25. And I'll change the color to one of these grays, but it's not a solid line. It's not a dash line. So you can see it's the same gray as these dash lines internally, but it's just a solid gray line. All right. So we've got something that looks like this, and I'm relatively relatively happy with that as my diagram. Now this is pretty much your bulk standard, like, you know, white line massing diagram. And so if I wanted to from here, I could go save as, and I could export it, export as, and exporting I can export as a PNG, as a JPEG, as a TIFF image, even as a PDF. So I'm curious to know what happens if I save this as a PDF. I don't know whether the white background's going to go with it or not. So we'll see how that goes. I'll go back to here. It's just in my downloads folder. Export. And I don't know whether the background's going to be showing or not, but that's okay. And I'll go to, that's one of my sketches. Open. And there's my PDF. And say okay. Oh, cool, excellent. So the white background hasn't gone with it. So now my actual colors are all set. Or sorry, my lines are all set. I can now play around with this as I want. So if I wanted to, just for argument's sake, you guys know how to use Photoshop. I'm just going to put a white background behind it, just so I can see how this is going. And importantly, with this layer, I want to make a new layer for a paint bucket. So this one is my lines, and this one I might go paint bucket. All right. Then I can essentially go to my paint bucket layer and start using, you know, whatever colors I want to use. Okay, so that might be my top floor. That's one set of apartments. You get the idea. Like, this becomes very easy to do once you have your line work in order. Whoops. Okay, and then what I can do from here is I can just turn down the opacity slightly. All right, and then that's how I get those gray, if you can see on the screen, I got those gray dash lines still showing underneath. So the box now looks semi-transparent. And that's how I can do my block and stack diagrams. Okay, and then from here, it's actually very easy in terms of, like, you just save this. So what I do is I'd probably turn off the background. It depends. If your PowerPoint is white, then you could leave the white background on there. If not, if it's a darker background, you turn it off. So I'll leave it on for a sec. I'll go File, Save As, save a copy, and I'll say this is a JPEG, and I'll just call this block and stack option 1 .jpeg. Okay, okay, and then it's a case of going back to my my PowerPoint. I'll delete that. I'll go Insert, Pictures, Picture from File, and there's my first block and stack option. And I can just change the size of that diagram, and I'll need to edit the, the layout. But essentially something like that. So now I've got my first option for a block and stack diagram, looking quite professional. Now, if I wanted to do something a bit different, now I haven't shown you in totality what my design looks like, but it's quite dark. And I'm doing this purposely to show you on the other end of the spectrum, how you can use your design, your color palette, your precedents to set the tone of your overall design standard and philosophy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some colors from my precedents, which are quite dark in nature, and use those as my colors for my block and stack, or as my line work for my block and stack. I could do that as well. So what I might do here is, with a black background, I'm going to go back to this is Photoshop, and I don't know, there's a few ways I could do this. I could either change the background color firstly to black, because in my instance it's a black background, and I'll make that all black. And you can see now the only lines that are showing are the gray lines. The black lines are now not showing. I could just double click and make all of these white by going like this, or in an instance I could make them all red like that. And that might work well for me particularly, because mine's like a red and a blue theme. And then what I could do is, I've got some images here. These are like my precedent images, and I could use some of these colors inside of my, to do my painting inside the lines. So if I go like back to here, and I go back to my paint bucket and delete that, I can make a new layer, call it paint bucket again. And this time I might just drag this image across into here for no other reason other that I can get some of these colors. So with the paint bucket selected, I'm going to go with my paint bucket. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard or Option on Mac. And I'm going to find some of these colors that I want to try, like this dark. See, I got like these gray blues. And I need to make sure that I do this. Okay, something like that. And I might do this for all the bottom ones. So these are showing you 4-bedroom apartments. And then I might use this like sky blue. And what I need to do is I need to move that out of the way. Let's try that again. Back to my paint bucket layer. At the moment, this doesn't look like it really works. Okay. What I'll do is I'll turn off that little inspiration. And what I'll do is I'll turn this right down. Something like that. Okay. Now, the red lines might be a little bit too intense, so I might darken those line colors from like a bright red. I could go more of like a darker red like that. And then if I do that, I could always play around with making these colors a little bit brighter. No, that doesn't work. Make those dark again. These lines need to be brighter, so maybe they become like a gray, or they could be like full white, and then I could change this to be something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not such a fan of these. I reckon it would be good if the line colors themselves were separated into those different tones. So the top ones were, you know, blue and the bottom ones were red. Now, I could do that, but that's going to be like an Illustrator job where I have to go back into here, which you can do if you're after that sort of style, and I'd select these lines individually and change them. So let's take, like, for instance, these lines. And I'm just holding down Shift on my keyboard. And I'm going to make these a different color. So I'm going to go here, and I'll go New Color. And I'll make these more of like that darker red, like so. So if I zoom in, you can see they're like that sort of dark red. But I need to keep doing that with the rest of these. So I go Stroke, and there's my color. And then I'm going to keep going around, holding down Shift as I go. You can see it's quite a time-consuming process, but it's definitely worth it, particularly once you get like a style that you like. The white line diagrams, also like just your standard black line diagrams, it's not bad, but it's not overly creative. I would try and, you know, develop your own language. All right, so these ones I'm going to change now to be more of like along the lines of that blue. So I'll go to the stroke, I'll make another color, and I'll find something like that. Yep. Okay, so something like that. And then these black lines in between, they're going to have to turn into, really, they'll probably have to turn into white lines. Stroke, and I'll go make a new one. And these all just turn into white, like so. And when I'm done, I shouldn't be able to see them anymore. Now, this could be a bit quicker if I was to separate these inside of Rhino into different layers. But, you know, you're only going to get so far. If you want to do some more customization, doing it within Illustrator is, you know, well within your right. You can't always foresee every possible option you want to try inside of Rhino. Okay, and then the last ones are these ones. Okay, and then I'll zoom out. Yep, not bad. Now let's try that again. I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to save this. Oops, I'm going to go, yep, Adobe PDF. I'm going to save over the top of it. Do I want to replace? Yes, I do. Save As. Go back to my Photoshop file. I'm going to close this off. Don't save. I'm going to open up that PDF again. Once it's loaded, I don't think it's quite loaded yet. Is there something I'm missing here? Yep, there it is. Block and stack option 1. And then say OK. And there it is. So now what I'm going to do is do a background. And I'm going to make that background black. And swap that around. And now this is what I've got, something like this. So I've colored those lines individually and I've kept the white lines there. And then what I might do is I might still go another layer. But what I can do this time is the paint bucket, instead of being on top of the lines layer, what I can do is this. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to drag this object again across to here because I want these colors. And I'll zoom in, so something like this. I'll go to my paint bucket, hold down Alt on my keyboard so I get this sky blue, and I'm going to go back to, I'm on my paint bucket layer, I'm just going to go paint, and paint, like that, and then these ones down here, I'll make like a brighter red. Oops. Okay, like so. But this time what I might do, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to put the paint bucket behind layer 1. Okay, so it's behind that layer. And then I'm going to turn that down a little bit. And I have something like this. Okay, now that might be your style, it might not. In this instance, let's say that I like this version. I'm going to go Save As, save a copy. And I'm going to make this a JPEG, and I'll just call it that. And now when I go to my PowerPoint, I'm going to go Insert, Image, Image from File. And there's like my first block and stack. And you can see how this is much more akin to my actual style. This follows on from my precedent colors, and the tonality is similar. So it's a very different way to do it. You can always use the standard, you know, the white option, which I think, yeah, like that. You can always do that option as well, if that's the sort of vibe you're going for. But make sure that the colors that you pick when coloring those blocks mimic the style or the precedence that you're actually going after. Now for the last step, which is to actually diagram a conceptual form process. Again, this is going to be more time consuming than anything else, so it's really important that you make sure that you have modeled everything you want. and that they are set up in layers that already tell the story that you want. And it's really important that as you do that, you keep referring back to your diagram view. So if you're in perspective mode, or if you're in top view and you're moving stuff around, always double click on your diagram view to make sure you can see what you're going to end up diagramming in the end. And it's always better, again, to diagram more than what you essentially want to see, because you can always crop it back later. You can't add more to it. And that might be the case when we go and pull this inside of our PowerPoint presentation at the end of the day. So let's take a look at this a little bit closer. So the block and stack 2D diagram. Whoops, I'm going to go back to my default layer because you can't turn off a layer that you're on. Turn that off. You can see you've got quite a few layers in here now. So it's really important that as you're going along, that you're very considerate about what layers you've got, what's on them, naming them clearly, putting them in an order that suits and works for you, because it will become very complicated to look around. Okay, so the first diagram is the mass. All right, so there's our massing diagram. Pretty simple. I'm going to go Control A or Command A on Mac, and I'm going to go Make 2D. All right, and now it's going to ask me again, would I like tangent lines? Would I like hidden lines? Would I like silhouette lines? So I'm going to keep the silhouette lines on. I'm going to turn off the hidden lines because we probably don't want to see the hidden lines at this point in time. And I'm going to group the output. And this time, this layer, I might call this one Form Diagram. And I'm going to call this Form Diagram 01. Okay, because I want to separate these. So I'll go OK. I'll go to my top view. And there's my diagram there. I'll pull this out over to the side. So let's take a look at the actual lines that have come out. They're not bad, but you can see that there's quite a bit of cleanup that's going to be required. Or some adjustments to the model. I'm not sure yet which is going to be best. So, what's the issue? So the first issue is that there are areas where we don't actually have the diagram that's been completed. And there's a whole raft of reasons why that might be. But the easiest way to fix this, rather than try and figure out the model, is to simply click on this curve, select the endpoint, and then just drag it across to the nearest point, like that. And that closes off the diagram, enough to make it look like it's an entire image, or it's an entire picture. Because remember, if you want to edit these, you need to make sure that these are closed gaps everywhere. So think ahead of time. If I want to color this road in like a light gray or something like that to create distinction between footpath, the tidal boundary, and the road, I need to make sure that these are closed off. So again, I could just grab this line, I could just drag this out if I wanted to, something like that. And I could do the same thing with a footpath. I could always just draw lines as well, but you have to make sure that you're doing it all on the same layer. If you don't do it on the same layer, you'll be in big trouble. Then next you've got this area here where you're meant to have the curve between those 2 points there. Now I could just use, again, in this instance I'm going to use a line. I'm going to use an interp curve, so INT, hit enter. I'm going to click once to start, once in the middle, and once to end, and then right click to complete the command. But I need to make sure that I click on this layer, and I need to now put it on form diagram. I need to put it on the right layer. So I'm going to go curves, and I'm going to say change object layer. All right. Now, the other thing is I might want to control, how the houses are appearing relative to the footpath, relative to the outside line. By how I want to control, I mean, like what the type of lines are, like what the line types are for the houses versus the street versus the road. Because there's endless options you can do here. And there is one option that we didn't do that we need to make sure that we do. Okay, so at the moment, underneath form diagram 01, I just have visible curves. I've got curves, and if I turn them all off, notice they all turn off. I have tangent curves, and I've got the silhouette curves, which you can't really see. This is not acceptable. This is actually not the way I want to do it. So I'm going to right-click on, I'm going to right-click on diagram form, and I'm going to go delete. And I'm going to get this warning, so I'm going to delete all these objects. So I'm going to say yes, and yes, and yes. Okay, so I've now deleted that diagram, and I'll tell you why. So I'm going to go back to my diagram view. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to go select all, make 2D, and this I forgot to change on this one. So the object properties are from the input options, or from the input objects or by the output layers. And then it says maintain source layers. I'm going to click on this and go maintain source layers. The rest of this is fine, and I'm going to keep it as form diagram 01. I'm going to go OK. I'm going to go to my top view. I'm going to drag this out again. All right. Now this time, all right, when I click on these layers, you will notice that when I come down to here, I've got my form diagram 1, and I've got all of my layers there from the actual model themselves. So if I turn off my site layers, like for instance, I can turn off the title boundaries. You can see they're turning on and off. The street edge is now its own layer. Okay. And then I've got like my neighboring properties, and they're broken up into like the silhouette lines, the curves, the visible curves, the silhouette lines, and the tangent. So if I turn off all tangents, that's what it does. Okay. And then all curves, I can turn them all off. Or I can go into curves. I can say, actually, I just want the title boundaries turned off, or I just want the street edge turned off. So it's really important because I want to have full control over my line styles when we move into AutoCAD. Now, there's a few more things that we need to do here to make sure this diagram is right. And again, the more time you spend, the better this outcome will be. So I'm going to go back a few steps, and I'm going to go back to where we started. So turn all this off. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to my diagram view. There's one more thing I'm going to do. You noticed that before I wasn't getting these lines here that intersect with the houses. And the reason for that is because the actual walls essentially go through the floor, or go through the site itself. Now, what we can do to fix this problem, it might be time consuming, but let's see if this works. I'm going to go trim, and I'm going to select this top surface as my cutting object. I'm going to hit spacebar or enter. I'm going to click on these walls here and see what I'm doing. I'm actually trimming these walls of the house back down to the ground level. So it looks something like this, because watch what happens. So this is the house that's next door to our property, okay? I'm going to go back to my diagram view, select all, make 2D, everything looks good. Go to my top view, drag this out here, and I still don't have these intersecting lines, which is very, very frustrating, because essentially what I want to see is something like this. It'd be much nicer. So I need to figure out sort of what is going on there. That should have done the trick. Let's go back and just make sure. I wonder if there's something else I can do here. So select all, make 2D. I'll see what happens if I turn on my hidden lines, but I don't want to do that, because there's going to be tons of lines if I do that. Yeah, that's not the way to do it. That's way too messy. The other thing I could try is lifting the house 10 millimeters like that. Let's try again. Make 2D. Yep. Go to my top view. Ah, damn it. I need to turn back on. Make 2D. Turn off hidden lines. Go to my top view. Ah, that's better. Okay. So all I have to do is just lift the house up 10 centimeters or 10 millimeters, and I've got this now. But I'm still not done cleaning this. So you can see now that looks a lot better that I have those lines, and you can see this one doesn't. So I need to go through and continue to trim the rest of them. But there is a few other things I need to do once that is done. There's quite a bit of like line work still yet to do. There is one other thing that we should be doing here. And that is essentially to turn off the massing itself and just do the site by itself. So that way when we do the site once, we can essentially just continue to put objects over the actual topography. And I'll explain what that looks like in a minute. So I'm going to go back again. I'm going to go back to my diagram view like this, and I'm going to finish trimming these objects. So I'll finish trimming these houses back. So again, I'm going to go trim. I'm going to click on the actual top surface. I say OK, and I'm just going to go around and trim all of the walls back to where they were, like so. So now they're all finishing flush with the ground projection, or the ground topography. All right. And then what I need to do as well is pick all these properties, not pick the topography, and lift them 10 millimeters. Okay, so you can barely, you won't even see it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my massing. So it looks just like this. Go to my diagram view, select all, make 2D, say okay, go to my top view, and you can see already this is looking much cleaner. I've got these edges around the house, well, not all of them, but some of them. I'm obviously haven't trimmed some of these, but that's looking a heck of a lot better. And I don't have anything on my site yet because we're going to diagram everything individually and basically stick it on top of it. So that way we don't have to keep editing this layer again and again and again. So I'm just going to quickly finish trimming these up, and then we'll continue with this diagram process. Now that I've got my make 2D complete, and this is looking a lot cleaner. So you can see now we have these edges around the house. There's still quite a bit of cleaning up to do. So what I need to make sure of is I'm on the right layer. Remember, under the form diagram, there's actually 3 layers there within. Okay, so you have like the visible layer, then I drop that down, and then I'll have the silhouette layer, which will only be a few lines. The silhouette layer I'm going to keep on. Then I've got my curves, so if I turn that off, it'll be all my internal curves. I can't turn that off because I'm currently on that layer. Then all my curves that are tangent, which there currently isn't too many that are tangent, at least in this view. So with that view, I might turn that one off. So I might just delete the tangent layer. There's one object. Okay, so that's gone. So now this is much easier. So underneath my 3D site, because remember it's the same layer structure as what's above in my actual 3D object, underneath my neighboring buildings, I'm going to double click on that, so I'm on that layer. And now it is really tedious, but it is again very much worth your time. I'm going to come to these areas where it still hasn't quite worked. I'm just going to click, and I'm just going to use my line tool to go from point to point. You can see when I zoom out how much that brings out this diagram. Same with these here. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, does not have to be perfect, but it's just it just helps sort of clean up the image. And this is particularly important if you think that you're going to use the paint bucket tool to paint these houses. If they don't have closed loops, when you use the paint bucket tool, it's going to paint the whole drawing essentially. So it is just a case of going around one by one and cleaning these up. There's another one there. But there is a few other things I need to do with these houses. So these houses, for some reason, in some instances, it's giving me the thickness of the walls that were built in Revit originally. So what I need to do is ungroup these, and I need to click on these lines and delete them. You can see how much cleaner that is now. You just got this one sort of mass for your building. You don't have two. So I'll remove that, and you can see how much cleaner that now looks. I'll come over to this house and I'll do the same thing again. Ungroup, delete, and I might have to ungroup again. Like so. That's much better. So you just get that clean face. Then over here, if I ungroup that, I can remove that, but I still have to drag this over to there to make sure it's closed out. So if I paint bucket this, it looks all clean. Ungroup, delete, delete. Now that house, that's perfect. That's pretty much done. Tiny little line there I'll remove. The rest of that house is, yep, that's good to go. Now the next one, how does this one look? There's a few, ungroup. Yep, again, ungroup. And then I'm going to close this line. And one more. And that looks good. That's now that house complete. And this is the way to do it, is just to go around one by one and make sure they're fit for purpose. Making sure I've got no broken lines anywhere. That's fine. Again, ungroup. Looks good. And one more. Ungroup. And that house looks good. So I'm going to keep going with this. I'm going to finish these off, and then we'll move into the next step. All the CAD lines in the site. So I've cleaned up all the edges. Everything is a closed loop. And I've completed the remaining road edge and footpath edge to the end of the site. The other thing that I've done is copied or moved the actual site boundary into its own layer. So you can see it's a red line, and I've called that the title boundary, sorry, the site title. So I just created a new layer, made it a red line, and I got rid of the split, the two titles in the middle of the site, because that's not what we're doing for this project. We've got one consolidated site. So this is essentially the finished product. And it didn't take me too long, but I was very careful to make sure that everything is exactly as I want it to be. And I think that's probably as good as we're going to get it. There's probably one more thing I need to do here around the neighboring building. And that's come down like that. And then from there, something like that. From there to there. Yep, that will do. That's fine. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do is clean up these layers a bit, because I don't like how we've got, you know, inside curves, silhouette curves. We're not going to use them. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to create another layer, okay? So it's going to get a little bit confusing. We're going to go new layer. To make it clear, I'm going to go in capitals. I'm just going to call this diagram underscore site, okay? And then what I'm going to do is underneath of this, we need to set up our own layers again, all right? So I'm going to go sub layer, and I'm going to go, we'll go street, and then what I'm going to do is pick up these curves, and then go right click, change object layer, and I'm going to change the color just so I'm very clear that I've got the right lines. So I'll make them yellow. Well, that's probably a bad choice, the same color. I'll make them blue. All right, so that's now clean. Next one, I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call this one boundary, or boundaries. All right, we'll make this one a green, like a dark green layer. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select these titles. Okay, right click, change layer object. That looks good. I've still got a few here. Yep, and right click, change object layer. What a terrible color I chose. Let's go like a pinky red. And yep, I don't see any light blue anymore, so that's all on the right layer. Next up, another layer, and we'll call this one site title, and we'll make this just black. Okay, and we're going to pick these curves, because this is our actual site title. Change object layer. Nice. This is becoming much cleaner now. We know we only want a few layers here. Next up, we're going to have the neighboring site. So I'm going to go another one. I'm going to call this one existing buildings. Okay, this one I'm going to make like a bright green. And what I'm going to do this time to make life a bit easier is I'm going to right click on neighboring buildings and say select objects, and these all select. I'm going to go existing buildings, right click, and I'm going to go change object layer, right click, and then just click off, and I can see all of those lines are like that. Now what I should be able to do is under my form diagram one, I'm going to collapse all that, and I'm just going to leave, actually, you know what? There's still some more stuff I need. I actually need, it's a good way to do it, I'm going to turn that off. So the street's gone. I'm going to turn that off. That's my boundaries. I'm going to turn that off, which is my site title, and turn that off, which is my existing buildings. And now you can see we're left with a few lines back here. And we're going to need those lines. Okay, so what we need to do, what have we got here? So that blue line was a street. So I need to go, actually, was it? No, that looks like that is a part of the boundaries. So I need to go, I need to select this line, go right click on boundaries and change layer object. Now it disappears. Okay, now same with these. I need to select these. All of these gray lines that look like they're from a building. Okay, because these are at the back, and then go right click existing buildings, change object layer, they should disappear. Now these lines that are left look like that this is actually like the topography edge. So again, let's make a new layer, and we'll call this one topography edge, and we'll make this one, what color haven't we done? We'll do like a yellow. Okay, and then we're going to select all of these and go topography edge, change object layer, it turns yellow. I can turn that off. So now when I turn on my street, there's my street. When I turn on my boundaries, there's my site boundaries, there's my site title, there's my existing buildings, and there's my actual edge of my diagram. What this allows me to do now is to delete the form diagram. So I'll delete that, and underneath of that, that's all gone now. So I just have diagram underscore site, and that's nice and clean. Ready to go into Illustrator. So I can turn that whole thing off and on. All right, now, next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my diagram view. So this is now my 3D model, okay? Double click on diagram view, and then I've got my first diagram showing, which is my site massing. So that is now turned on. I'm going to do, whoops, go to do the same thing again. Select everything in the view, make 2D. I don't care, this is all fine, say okay, go to my top view. I'm just going to drag this over here because, you know, all I want, I've got my nice clean title here, my nice clean diagram. This version, I just want this object, and I need something else to take with it. So I need this, I'm going to take this line, and I'm just going to move this over here, okay? And immediately, I want to make a new layer. Okay, so in here, I'm going to go, you can see how like messy this is. I have my site diagram, my diagram underscore site, then I have form diagram 02, which is like all of this stuff that I just developed, which we want to get rid of. We want to make this nice and clean. Okay, so what I'm going to do is firstly, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to delete it. I'm then going to go down to, which it hasn't deleted the layer. Notice it has not deleted all these layers, which is fine. What I am going to do though is I'm going to go diagram, I'm going to make a new layer, not a sub layer, a new layer. This one's going to be capitals, diagram underscore mass. Okay. What I might do is I'll go 01 dash mass. So I know this is the first diagram that I'm going to be showing, which is the massing. Okay. And I'll make this, let's make it like a dark blue. All right. I'm going to select all of these objects and go right click and go change object layer. So now these are all like a blue object. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is this form diagram 2. I'm going to click on this and click the X, and now it's all gone. So now I've got two diagrams. I have diagram underscore site and diagram underscore 01 mass. Okay. So then what I can do from here is I need to clean this up. So what I'm going to do to make sure I've got the same curves, I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to click on these curves. I'm going to go copy. I'm going to make sure I copy them. I'm going to come across to here. Same location. Paste. I've got 2 lines there. I'll delete that. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. All together. And then go O1 diagram. Change object layer. That looks good. Now last thing to do, ungroup. And I'm going to remove these tangent edges. Okay? And there's our mass. And I'm just going to, what I will do, I'm going to group that. Whoops, not grasshopper, my bad. Select all that, group. Okay, that's all one object. Then all I need to do is just go move from here, like that. So it looks something like this. So I've got 2 diagrams over the top of each other, okay? And then all I need to do is turn off that layer, and there's like my 2 diagrams. There's my original site, there's my massing diagram. All right, now let's go through the next one. I'll go diagram view. I'm going to turn off the massing, and I'm going to turn on this one. Remember, this one is like our height limit. And so what I'll do is I'll do the same thing again. Select everything in the view, make 2D. Let's see if I can do this. Can I make this a little bit easier for us? I don't want silhouette lines. I want to group the output. I do want tangent lines. And by output layers or by input layers? To make this a little bit easier, it's not going to matter. I'll say apply, go to my top view, and the same thing again. Okay, so it looks like this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to where I said diagram O1 mass. I'm going to make a new layer, capitals, diagram underscore O2, and then this one will be height limit. All right, let's make this one like a dark, or like a pinky sort of color. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. So this time I want these 2 objects, and I'm going to go right click, change object layer, and they turn pink. All right, then what I'm going to do, now that that's done, I'm going to click on form diagram O2, and I'm just going to click the X. It's going to say, do I want to delete all these objects? Yes, I do. And they're all gone now. Okay, so all I need to do is come back to here. I'll turn off my O1 diagram. I want these lines again. And I'm just going to go copy. I'm going to copy from here across to there, like that. So that's a new copied object. Select all of this, and I'm going to go right click on my second diagram, change object layer, like so. Okay, and then I'm just going to ungroup, delete these tangent lines, like so. And so we know that this is our height limit line, okay? And so what we can do here is if I join these together, use the command join. So now it's one continuous line. Oh, nearly. Join. One continuous line. We can make that a dashed line inside of Illustrator. So it makes it much easier. So again, I'll put this together. I'll group it. And I'm going to move this from this corner back to the corner of the site. Okay. So it looks something like this. So now we've got the original site. We have our massing diagram. I can turn that off. And then we have our height limit diagram. Okay. Now, next one is our setback. So I'm going to go back to a 3D view. I'm going to turn on our setback. And we're going to do this again. So, third time. Make 2D. Okay. Go to my top view. Drag it over here. And let's make a new layer. So I'm going to come down to here. Form diagram O2. So where it says diagram underscore O2, I'm going to click a new layer. I'm going to call this one diagram underscore O3 dash setbacks. And we'll keep this as a black layer just for now. And then I need to select these objects, which are, luckily, they're grouped. Right click. Change object layer. So now they're black. Form diagram O2, click on that, hit the X, click apply to all. It's just going to delete some blocks, and that's what we've got. That looks pretty good. Now again, same deal. Come back to my original site diagram. Because I've hidden, you'll notice in my layers, I've turned off layer 1, or sorry, diagram 1, diagram 2, and I've just got setbacks showing in the site. Copy from this corner of the site. It's over here. Whoop, actually, you know what? This is a bit different now because we actually have a setback that's in a bit of a different location. So what I need to do is I'm going to go back a few steps because the title is actually this line here, just there, because it's set back 1 meter. So what I need to do actually is I'm going to do the same thing again. I'll grab these lines. Okay, I'm going to go copy. I'm going to go from here to this line there. Okay, because remember we're now set back. Now I can do the same thing again. Go down to form diagram 02, delete it, yes, and this is what we're left with, something like this. And now all I've got to do is just use the trim command. So I'm going to click on this, ungroup, and remember that these are just essentially flat planes. So I'll delete that, delete that. I'm deleting these tangent lines that sit in the middle because we just want it to look like a wall, essentially. Like so, and I'm going to delete these two. Okay, it looks like that. Now the last thing to do is just to trim this. So I'll use the trim command. Oh, actually, you know what? I won't do that because I need somewhere to drag this back to. So I'm going to select all of this, make sure that's on the right layer. So diagram 03, change layer object or object layer. Select them all, group. They're all grouped, and then we're going to click on it and select it from this corner on the edge of the boundary. Bring it back over here, and then place it there. And now you see we've got our setbacks. Now at the moment it doesn't look that good because we're seeing all the line work underneath, but wait until we put this into Photoshop and Illustrator. This will come up really, really well. Okay, so we have now diagram 1, which is our mass, diagram 2, which is our height limit, diagram 3, which is our setbacks. Next one. Back to our diagram, 3D view, turn off setbacks, and now I'm going to turn on my actual massing. So this was my first mass. So I'm going to do just a simple, essentially like a cube on site, and then I'll articulate the cube, and then I'll drop the cube. I'll drop the site down. I'll tier the site. So in this instance, it's the exact same thing again. The most important thing is I need to put these objects on a certain layer, and I probably should have a line that closes this off. So the reason why I still have the rest of this site, because I need somewhere to basically move this object from and move it over to, essentially. Okay, so I'm going to go diagram 3, I'm going to make a new one, diagram underscore 04, and this one will just be duality. I'll make this dark blue, and then I'll click on these objects. Okay, right click, change object layer. And now I know they're on the right layer. So all I gotta do now is right click and go select objects, and then go move, and I'm gonna move them from this corner of the site across to here, and then I know that's in the right location. The last thing I need to do is just double click on this layer so I'm on it, and then use a line, and I'm just gonna go from there to there. All right, and then make sure, whoops, that I group. Oh, I don't even need to group it, it's all good. I'll double click on default so I'm not on that layer anymore, so I can turn it off, and now you can see I've got my first massing. Okay, then same deal, I can come over to form diagram 2, delete, apply to all, yes, and we've got something that looks like this now. Alright, next one. Go back to my 3D. I'll turn off that. And I'll do this one next. This is my first style with articulation. So come down to here. Diagram 05. Okay, and then I'll make this I'll make it like a purple. Same deal, I'm going to select these objects. Okay, and then right click, change object layer. So now I know that's all there. Right click to select those objects. Move from this corner of the site back to this corner of the site. And you can see now how they're sort of overlapping each other. So again, I'll turn off duality. And that looks good. And then again, double click on that layer where it says voids and just draw a line from there to there. A line from there to there. And then a line from there to there. I want to make sure I close up all my lines so I can paint bucket this nice and easily. Okay, scroll back up to here, double click on default, then diagram form, diagram 2, right click. I'm going to click on the red X, apply to all, yes. Okay, and last one. Back to my diagram, and the next one I want to do is my final version. Okay, so I've got two topographies turned on here. I'm going to turn off that surface. I'm going to hide it. And the reason why I've done that is because I've got this site that like terraces like this. So you have the upper terrace and the lower terrace. So I actually need to bring those lines across with me as well. So I double click on diagram form, select everything and go make 2D. Back to my top view. Drag this over here. Now there's a bit more work that's required here because you can see the site is actually like cut out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my last diagram, diagram 6, and I'll call this one drop, and I'm going to make this one red. All right, now let's go through and just adjust accordingly. There's quite a few lines missing from here. So actually, you know what, I'm going to make it blue just so it's very different from the original. So select these, right click, change object layer, so it's very clear which ones I've still got to add. Okay, that looks good. That looks pretty good. I know there's a few there. Change object layer. Then what I need to do is actually double click on it, and I need to do a couple of lines to close this out. So go from there to there, and from there to there. And then also going to go ungroup. I'm going to delete that line. I'm going to delete that line. So we got something that looks like this. Okay, so you can clearly see the upper terrace, and then it drops down. In fact, I'll get rid of that. The upper terrace, then it drops down, and then the lower terrace here. So what I need to do now is go right click, select objects. So all those are selected. I'm going to go group, and then I'm going to move them from this corner of the block to that same corner of the block just there. Okay, so you got something that looks like this. So I'll turn off my voids, and I do have one more line that I need to add. I need to go a line from here, there to there. And that looks good to me. Okay, cool, excellent. All right. So, form diagram 2, delete, apply to all, yes. All right, we essentially have our diagrams kind of finished now, at least in here. So I'm going to go back to my default view, and I'm going to go through these one by one. So I've got my site, I've got my mass, I've got my height restriction, I have my setbacks, I've got my duality, essentially my first form. Then I've got where I've articulated that form, and then I've got where the form drops. Okay. Now, if I wanted to do the thing where, I wanted to see like my site, like with the site analysis, you could do the same thing again. You can model those objects in 3D essentially, and then just keep looking back on your diagram. So if I went to like, take like this for instance, and I did like, I don't know, I'll do sphere there that represents like the sun, and then I do like an arc, so the center of the arc's there, out. I did something like that. That's no good. You can see when I go to my diagram view, I've got like that arc there with the sun. I can move it around, and then I could use that as like a line style in Make 2D, or I could actually just draw the icons too and say that that's my sun angles, see where the sun rises and sets across the logic of the site, which may actually help. Like, is I could go something like this, where I put the sun here, and I could do something saying, like you're going to get that western sun or some afternoon sun in the balcony here on this side of my second penthouse, or that I'm shading. I'll end up shading this with some sort of shading device in the facade or something like that. Or I could do the opposite, where I drag this over here, and essentially what I say is that you get all this nice morning sun that's streaming across because you got this articulation. It means that this penthouse down here, which is lower, because you have this articulation here, you still have the sun coming through the eastern glass or the eastern face on that side. So you can see how modeling these some of these diagram elements in 3D is much easier, because to draw that arc in Photoshop or in PowerPoint afterwards would be extremely difficult to do. It'd just be very time consuming. So you could do that too. Just make it a separate diagram, and then you can keep going from there. But there's no sort of limit on what you can and can't diagram. So it's entirely up to you. The other one too is in this instance, in this 3D, I've got if I come back up to here, the difference between where is it? Okay, the difference between this version and this version is simply that the building was up, and then I basically drop one side of the building down. The south side I dropped down. Now I could also model that with arrows. So I have drawn some arrows here. I could bring that up, and I could rotate it 90 degrees. And I've just modeled these from earlier, and I could do them like that. When I go back to my 3D, I could hide those things, and you can see now I've got like that arrow already showing, and I could easily just change the size of that arrow to make it very clear that what I've done is I've pushed down the western section of the building. Again, very easy to do, and then essentially just make 2D, go to my view here, and you can see how that's actually going to come out. Like, it's actually made these into curves, which I could then put into Illustrator, or I could bring this into Photoshop. I'm going to use a paint bucket to color that. I can color the sun. I've got the arc there. I could change that line type inside of Illustrator to be like a dashed line or a yellow line or whatever it might be. So you can see how it does become a bit easier if I model these instances inside of Rhino rather than trying to do this after the fact in post-production in Photoshop. There's no right or wrong. Okay, so I'll go back. Okay, we've got our diagram here. So we're now ready to start exporting these out and then opening them within Illustrator, and then putting them into Photoshop. That's really where a lot of this will come together, and there's so much option that we can do there. So the last step in here is simply to go to my diagrams. So I've got my diagram layers here. I'm going to select all this, and I'm going to go export, and I'm going to export this out. Now, tip for you, export it out with the same name as your layer. So diagram_01, or in this case, just site. Okay. enter, enter. Next one, turn on the mass, turn off your diagram, select it, export, and this will be diagram underscore 01 dash mass. Enter, enter. Next one. Export diagram underscore 02 dash height limit. Setbacks. Export diagram underscore 3 dash setbacks. Diagram underscore 4 duality. And the last one. Okay, see the last one, this is good because we're seeing all of this together. We can see that this last one had a couple of these extra little lines here on the outside, which we do not need. So I'm just going to click on this. I'm going to go ungroup, and I'm just going to delete these little stragglers here. Always good to see. Cool, done. So that's all good. Export, last one, diagram underscore 06, and then we're calling this one drops. And then export, export, done. We're now done inside of Rhino. We'll open up Illustrator and continue on from there. Now that we have our diagrams completed, I can open up Illustrator and I'm going to open up our files. So you'll see the different diagrams. Diagram site, 01 for the mass, the height limit, setbacks, my first block and stack diagram, the voids that I've put into it, or the articulation, and then the drop of the design. So, or the tiering of the design. So I'm going to start with the diagram for the site. So I'll click on this and open it up. Now you're going to get this option again of what size do you want your CAD file to be. Last time we just did fit to artboard, but in this instance, we're going to do scale, and a scale of 1%. Because remember that the Make 2D image that you created in Rhino was actually the real size of the site. So the length of like a curve or a line on the site was probably actually close to 30 meters long in real life, because it is a 1-to-1 scale. So when we bring it into Illustrator, we're going to scale it by just 1%, essentially. So I'll click OK. That opens up here, and we can see how the diagram currently looks. And you can see the variation in line weights. But more importantly, we do have clean layers now for each of our line types. So first thing, let's go through and just clean these up a little bit, just with the standard lines as they are. So I'll go, what is this? This is our site boundary. So I'll click on the little button like next to the circle. If I click on this, you get like this little square, and that means I've selected all of the objects within that layer, which is our site. I'll go to properties. I'm going to change this to a red, and I'm going to change the size of the line. Let's go 0.3, and we can make this a dash line for now. I think that's okay. We could do something like this. So if I wanted to do like if I actually wanted to do like a boundary line, I could do something like this. So a 10 point, then a dash of 5, then a 10 point. So what I could do is I could do something like this, like that. So this now looks more like, that is more like a title boundary, dash dot, dash dot, dash dot. Okay, so that looks good. Now the rest of my layers, let's keep going. So this is now our site boundary. I'm going to put this just on a standard black line, and I'll make that like 0.5. That looks okay. Next layer, this is our streetscape. So I'm going to do something similar here. I'll just change this to a black line, and I'll give that a 0.5 stroke. Next layer, what is this one? This is our title boundaries. Okay, So go back to properties. This time I am going to, I'll go black as well, and I'll start it off at 0.5. So it's a bit of a thinner line. And then finally, the neighboring houses, same deal. I'll do it just with a black line, and I'll give it a line thickness of 0.5. So this is what we've got, something that looks like this currently. Okay, and we haven't colored anything in yet. All we've got here is just some lines, and we've kept the site boundary with a red dash dot line to make sure that you can always identify, you know, what is our actual site. Now, there's so many options. You can make these lines any colors you want, any thickness you want. Like you can do this individually, like you can select these lines individually still if you want to. But because we have broken up into layers, it makes it a bit easier. But take like the road, for instance, I could always make a new color. And I can make this like 100, 100, 100. What have we done there? That's not right. Sorry, 1 second. Click on that. Properties. Make a new color. Okay. There we go. So if I zoom in, you'll see now that this line is gray compared to the black line there. And that might be like a style that you want to go after. The other thing you can do as well is you could always select these outer curves. Now this might take you a while because you are selecting them, you know, one by one, and you have to, it will take a bit of time because you've got to like select these lines to go around the property. And you could do something like this where you give this simply, it's still a black line, but you make it much thicker, something like that. And that's quite an effective approach. So I've made that, what have I made that, like 3.4, made it 4. So it looks something like that. And that's a pretty cool look too. But you can see that it does work when I just use the land, but really what I should be doing is following the path, almost like a comic book where it's the outermost line, and make that a thicker line. It really comes down to your own personal preference. Okay, so let's keep going here. I'm going to open up the second one, which is our mass. So I'll open that. Same deal, scale by 1%. Now I get something that looks like this. Now this time I can be a little bit more direct in my approach. So just go to my layers. It's all currently one layer. So I'm going to change this to a black color. Okay. And change the stroke. I'll start off with just a 0.1. Just like a 1 point. But what I will do is I'm going to take the outsides of these ones because I do think this is one of those instances where this will look a lot better as a thicker line. And you'll see as I make this thicker, there's places I've missed. So I'm going to pick those up. And I made that a 4 point. Now this one here does not have to be, that can be 1. So I've got something that looks like this. So this nice thick line around the outside, and then the thin line on the inside, and that's our massing diagram. Now we can, what we can do now, I'm going to do one more. So I'll go open, and we'll go my height limit. I'll open that up, 1%, something similar. So select it all, properties, change the color. You don't have to make it black, I just am, because I just think it's easier to do that way. But I will show you an instance where we might want to change these colors. And then what I will do is, again, I'll make sure that the strokes are all consistent. So all are a 0.1, or just 1 point. This one in here, we're going to dash these lines. So on the stroke, I'll click on this and I'll say make it a dashed. And this time we don't want it to be a dash dot, so I'm just going to make it like this. So a 10-point dash with a 5-point gap. And that looks something like that, which is not too bad. That's pretty good. And then I'll click on these outside lines again. And I'll make this 0.4, and it's pretty clear where I've missed those lines. So you're very particular here, making sure I select the right line. And I could have made this a little bit easier for me because you can see that's because I've missed the lines inside of Rhino. I mean, it's a closed shape, but there's like all these little finicky lines. 0.4, that's better. That one. 0.4. And this one. Nice, that looks good. Excellent. Now I could make these dash lines a little bit easier to see. There we go. So make the dash line 2 point, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this 15 by 10. There we are. So the dash line's a little bit more pronounced, and I'll delete that. Much better. Okay, so that's my height limit. Let's take these into Photoshop and see how we can go. All right, so I've got this here. For my purposes, am I going to... This could be quite finicky. If I want to make this like a thick line, I'm going to have to do some like copying and pasting. And that's exactly what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just copying that line and doing this because I'm going to have to change this into a thick line, which is 0.4. And then this one and this one. You can see how long this is going to take. So if I make that 0.4, it'll look like this. So I have to like take these lines, break them down, put another line over the cross over the top of it. It's going to be very time consuming. So I'm not going to do that. For the sake of time, I'm actually just going to take these lines again and I'm going to bring them back down. Or what could I do? I might actually just leave it just so it's the topology that's on thicker lines. Like that. Yep, that's not too bad. And then what I might do as well is I'm going to take these title lines and I'm going to make those that gray as well. And I'm going to edit that gray to be a bit brighter. So maybe 150, 150, 150. So something like that. Okay. It's going to be a bit of experimenting back and forward. So from here, I'm going to go File, Save a Copy. And I'll keep it with the same name, the exact same name. So I get rid of copy. But instead of .ai, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to go to Adobe PDF, say Save, and Save. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. So diagram 1, I'm going to go File, Save As, save on your computer, PDF, save, save, and this one. File, save a copy, PDF, and there we go. Now, let's go to Photoshop. So I'm in Photoshop, I'm going to go Open. I'm going to open up all three, say OK, and then OK. Nice. Right, so what I can do is in here, we can add the background. So I might, I'll start with a white background because this is more of the typical approach. And I'll just drag that underneath. And we've got something that looks like this in the moment. But the benefit now is we can color these objects however we want. Remember to name your layers. So these will be our line work. Okay. And then I can make another layer. I'm going to put, I'll put it on top of the line work for now, and then we'll put it underneath. And this is going to be our paint bucket. And let's just choose a different color. So I'll choose like a light gray, and I'm going to paint the street like that. So immediately if I remove my line work, I've got something that looks like this. The cool thing about this is I could lighten this up even further to like a really, really light gray. And I could start paint bucketing these houses. Okay. Now I could leave it like this with the lines actually turned on, but really cool. And remember, this is on a separate layer. This is not on the lines layer. This is on its own layer. The cool thing about this is I could then turn off the line work layer as well. So if I turn off the line work, I get something that looks like this. And that's a very cool like stencil art type of approach to get my diagrams. Okay, and that's just using typical gray color. All we've done is brought in the line work as a PDF, created another layer for my paint bucket, and then just started painting away, coloring in the lines essentially, and then turning off the line work. Now, that's one way you could do it. I'll turn off the paint bucket and I'll leave it just like this for now. Okay, then the next thing to do is to add in these diagrams. So we'll start with a massing diagram. And this is where your color choice is really important. And doing this, you know, drag. So I'm going to drag this over the top to our site diagram. And you can see, whoops, I've got to make sure I'm on the right one. So I'm going to go, same thing, diagram _ 01 mass. It's really important you name these right. So I'll put this at the top of the stack. And I'm going to move this into place. And if you're moving it around and you keep like doing this, where I want to select these lines, but I keep selecting the white background, that's because I have auto select turned on. So basically what that means is when I click on an object, it auto selects that layer. If I turn that off, it means that if I go to like my massing diagram, I can hover over here and it still moves that layer around. Okay. Now there's no snapping. I just need to line it up to the site and it looks something like this. Okay. Now, if I paint bucket this now, so let's say I wanted to, you know, I don't want to be able to see through this object. I want to be able to paint bucket through it. What's going to happen? Okay, what's going to happen is this. So I'll go to here and I'll go to my paint bucket and I can start painting. You can see I'm like painting, but I have to color around everything. It's a real pain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another layer for the diagram mass. Again, I want to make sure it has its own layer. Paint bucket. Okay, and I'll put it underneath the diagram. And what I'll do is I'll make this a certain color. Now the color choice is really critical. You have to go with what suits your presentation style. So my presentation, where is it? Is back here. So I've got like my color palette. I haven't gone through this in any detail yet, but what's important is I pick up on some of these colors and these tones, like these reds, these greens, also these reds to blues, etc. And for you, it might be that earthy texture. So the best thing to do in this scenario is to get like a little snip, take a little screen grab of some of your precedents. So here's my precedents here. I've just taken a screen grab. I'm just going to drag it across into my diagram and just leave it off to the side here as its own layer. And what that allows me to do is on this paint bucket layer, I can grab my bucket tool. So G is the shortcut. Hold down Alt on your PC or Option on your Mac. And I can just hover over and click and it's picking up on these colors. So I'm getting a like for like representation. So here I might want to do this like orangey red, or I might want to go more of this sort of darker, almost blood red, something like that. But what I need to do now is make sure that I turn off the other layers. So all I have is this showing here. Okay, no layers behind it, because when I click, you can see it makes it really easy to select those. So now when I turn back on my line work, it's now sitting in front of that other geometry, those other lines. It's like it's sitting there in 3D in front of everything. And I can still turn on my paint bucket layer. I can still turn off my line work. And when I turn off my line work, I get something that looks like this. Okay. And then I can turn off my diagram lines as well. So remember that each of these objects are diagrammed themselves. So I can turn those off, but I can keep the line work on behind it, or I could turn the line work off behind it and keep the diagram lines on as well. The other thing I could do is I can always double click on these because they are different essentially files, and I could use a color overlay on those lines. And for the color, I could use using my precedents, I could just use the eyedropper tool and pick up on another color that I really like. Like I might use the contrast or like a high red, like an orangey red like this. And that's my line work for my diagram. I could still turn on those backlines. That looks pretty cool. But also off, I reckon looks really sick. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so I'm gonna go my height limit diagram and I'm gonna drag this across to my diagram. And I'm going to be really careful with my layers here again. Naming your layers is super important. This is diagram _ 02 height limit. All right. And then I want to create another layer for the paint bucket underneath of that. Now, all these paint bucket layers may get confusing. So a good way around this is to essentially stack them together. So this diagram 1 and the paint bucket, I'm going to select those two by holding down either Control or Command on Mac and click on this little folder icon, and it creates a group. And so I can go to here and I can diagram _01-mass. So that I can just turn that off as an entire diagram now. We'll do the same with these two. So I'm going to put the paint bucket underneath the diagram, both of those together, folder, and then we're going to call this one diagram _02 height limit. Okay, so we can turn that off together. This also means that we can use the command. We can use this command called, if you hold down Alt on your PC or Option on your Mac and you click on the eyeball, you'll essentially isolate that layer by itself and it turns off all the other layers, which is a really good way to sort of get a layer turned on and off as quick as possible. So I'm just going to move this down here and let's go through that process again. Although in this instance, I want my precedence on because I want to be able to select these colors again. I'm going to go to my paint bucket layer because that's the only way I can actually use the bucket to paint. And I'm going to use, this time, I could use the same colors or I might go something different. I might do the blue this time. So I've got the blue here, and that's a little bit of an issue where I want to separate the colors between the dash line and the above and below. So I could do something like this, but in order to do this, because each of those lines are broken, Photoshop's just coloring the whole area in. So in order to solve this problem, it's actually pretty easy. I'm going to use my lasso tool. So I'm going to go to over here, and I'm just going to use polygon lasso. So L is the shortcut. And I'm just going to roughly trace over that dash line. And then what I'm going to do is, because it's the bottom I want to color, I can just do this and then double click and it closes that out. So now when I go back to my paint bucket, I can choose another color. So I might choose like a red, and I could paint bucket this area. And or I reckon what might be better is a darker blue. So I'll take more of a darker blue and I'll paint bucket like that. And I'll go Command D or Control D and it turns that off. And now I've got that split between my height limit and my lower height limit. Now, what I need to do is turn back on my CAD lines, and I'll turn back on my background. Then I have to select the diagram layer itself. So I can grab the group. No, I can't do that. I've got to grab them both together and then move them down. Something like that. So now you'll see when I turn off my diagram, I've got this one, and then that should like literally sit over the top. So now we've got our initial mass and then the height limit diagram. Now, tip for you is to use consistent colors, I would suggest. So this instance here, I'm using two different colors, probably not the best approach. I would copy the same color scheme across once I'm satisfied with the color scheme that I'm using. But again, if I keep those colors on, turn off the background layers, this looks pretty good, I reckon. Like a lighter color palette with these thick black lines, almost looks like a bit of a comic book marker. And then turning off the background line, so I have this stencil approach on the rest of the properties, I reckon it looks quite interesting. I reckon that looks pretty cool. Opposingly, I could do something like this where I turn off the first diagram, turn off the line weights. Yeah, I don't think that really works because if I turn off those lines, because the color is so light, or these colors are lighter, you can't see the dashed lines and it looks a little bit messy. But what I could do here is double click on the layer, the lines layer itself for that diagram, and I could make that like that orangey color, and I've got something that looks like this, or in actual fact, I'll probably make that like a darker red. Something that looks like that, and I can turn off that line work, and it looks something like this. It is really no wrong way to do this, it's just experimental. Okay, so let's keep going with this. So with that in mind, the next few I'm going to do, I'm going to inverse them to be darker. So I'll go back to Illustrator and I'm going to continue opening up my diagrams. So I'm now up to Setbacks, which is my third DWG, open, scale by 1%. There we go. And then I just got to clean these up. So these bottom lines, I'm going to make these a little bit thicker. They can still be black, but I might make that, say, a 3 point. And then the rest of these, I think they're already, no, they're not 1 point, but I will make them 1 point. Actually, a quicker way to do this, just select them all, 1 point, and then select these ones individually down here. Make them 3, like that. Okay, let's keep going. And then I've got my duality. Okay, this is quite easy. Select all, properties. Make it black and give it a stroke of 0.1. My voids. Yep, and then the last diagram. Excellent. Yep, that looks pretty good. The only question is, do I want, well, I want to get rid of these lines. They're out of nowhere. Delete those. And these lines here, do I want to keep these? Yes, I'll keep them because they help me set the site where they are. All right, so where are we up to? Up to setbacks. I've got to go File, Save a Copy, or I can still go Save As, but I need to save on my computer, and then I can go Save as PDF. My downloads, that's all good. Next one, File, Save As on my computer. Change it to PDF. All right, so that's all those diagrams done. So now back to Photoshop, and just to be clear, I'm going to close these out just so I've got a clear board to work with. The snip, no, I can stay. So open, and let's open up to the next one. So I got setbacks to drops. Right, okay. So setbacks. I'm going to drag that across to my diagram. Okay, and again, I've got that auto select turned on, which is really annoying. That's better. Right, now, make sure I create a folder, call it diagram_03, setbacks. I can literally copy that name for this layer. And then I'll create another one, which is my paint bucket. And I'm going to drag both of these, select them and drag them into the folder so they look like this. Okay, so I can collapse that. I can turn that diagram off and I'm left with this. I'll turn the background off as well, or the background paint layer. So I'm just left with this diagram and then the paint bucket layer. So here, we're going to try something a bit different where we could use transparency if we wanted to, but I'm just going to color these. So that's like my 4 meter setback. And then I might progressively just I could try and get like slightly darker. Like this. And this would look good if I turn off those layers. I have something, or those colors, those lines, I have something like that. And that's like my setbacks. And if I turn on my background, particularly if I remove the background lines, I end up with something that looks like this. And I reckon that's a pretty cool look, even with the lines, whether the lines are on or off, doesn't really matter. I reckon that's a pretty cool look. But I might want to color this differently. So if I don't like that paint style, I can just turn that off, put another layer in there, call it paint bucket 2, and then I can go again. I'll turn off those background layers. And this time I'll go for a bit more of a reddish approach. So I'll start off with like quite a sort of like a peach color, and then work my way like that. And then turn off those lines. And I reckon that's probably more That's probably a bit better. So each of those are a different setback. Now in this instance, we're going to want some text as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use T for text. Okay, I'm just going to make a little text box. And where am I writing? No, that's not it. Go back to here. Okay, T. What's going on here? I'm going to make that text box way smaller. Here's my text. And I'm going to make this all consistent. So for me, I'm using Times New Roman, but you want to make sure you're using your right text style. And I'm also using a style where I'm using caps and a gap between them. So I might go 1 meter. One meter setback. I might do a small m. I'll make that text probably white. Okay, and then I'll move it. Turn off auto select because that's annoying me. So I've got 1 meter setback. Okay, there it is there. Now, next thing to do when playing around with text, double click and I'm going to make the text box smaller. So it's just about the size of the text itself. Okay, hit enter. Oops. Hit escape, sorry. I'll move that there. And then I'll hold down Alt on my keyboard or Option on Mac. And I'll set this next one to be 2 meter setback. And then again, I think the next one is a 4 meter setback. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stagger these. So what I mean by that, I'll move that over here. Okay, so the 1 meter setback. All right, with that selected, I'm going to go Control T, right click, and let's see what skew does. I'm going to use skew, so I'm going to pull it up. So it's the same angle as that line. So I'll bring that back like that, hit enter. We can do the same thing with setback, 2 meter setback, click on that, Control T or Command T, right click, skew, and I'm just going to lift this up till it's the same perspective as that line. I'll move that down. Something like that. This is just one way you could do it. You know, you could do this however you want. You might not even want to have text on there. You might not want to show your setback like this. You might want to show your setback as some of the examples have shown that we've found in our precedents. There is no right or wrong. But that gives you a bit of an idea of like, you know, how you could go about this. And because these are all underneath that folder, they're all under that folder, I can just turn them all off and they all turn off together. So I've now got diagram 1, diagram 2, diagram 3, and you'll save these out essentially as JPEG images. So I'm going to keep going and let's go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of skip forward a bit to the end where I've got my final diagram. So the final diagram I'm going to drag across. There's my last one. And again, diagram _06 drops and same thing, folder. And I'll put that under that and I'll make another layer. I'll call this one paint bucket. All right, but this time I'm going to change this up. So the background, I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to turn it from a white background to a black background. This is the way that I'm doing my design. I much prefer it this way. The line work is now on, and you'll notice that anything that had a gray line is showing up as gray, but anything that had a black line is not going to show up now, okay? Which can be a little bit frustrating perhaps if you wanted that look. However, what you can do is you can also double click on the line work and you can change the color of that too. So you can make all of that line work white and you'll get something that looks like this. I'm going to turn off the background paint layers. You get something that looks like this. And that might be a style that you actually prefer. You might like that type of thing with the white lines. So more of like an AutoCAD sort of look. For me, I don't mind that, but there's probably something else that we could do here. If I turn the paint bucket on and I turn off the line work, you have something that looks like this. And I reckon that looks really cool, especially with the black background. So all I got to do to continue this process is, go to my paint bucket layer, and then just, if I want to pick up on that gray, I go to my paint bucket tool, which is G, hold down Alt or Option on Mac, hold over it to get that that line or that color, that gray, and then just keep clicking away. And I'll have to zoom in to make sure I'm not coloring in on the lines. Okay, you get the idea. I can turn off the line work and I'm generating more of those houses, those neighboring houses. And personally, I reckon this is a really cool effect. But there is so much more, so much more you could do here. We could go, what else could we do? The line work itself, we could change its color. We could change its opacity. So I could click on line work and drag that down. So it's just more of like a faint color like this, like 14%, 15, 16%. I could turn it back up. We could change the color of that to reminisce like the type of style I'm going for. I can make them like a neon blue or like a deep blue like this. I could change it to be more of like that peach orange or more of like that blood red. Something like that. I could paint the background, so just the background is a certain color. I mean, the options, honestly, are endless of what you could do here. So I think, what am I going to do? I reckon I would prefer it just without anything. But what I could do is this paint bucket layer itself, I could also color over that as one solid color. So rather than going around and repainting everything, I could just use a color overlay here, and I could choose to use like a certain color. I don't know why. I don't think this looks that good. But just to give you an example of, what you could do if you wanted to. It's a very effective approach. So I'm going to keep playing around with this. And there's probably a few other things that I could do. Could use outer glow on some of these as well. So I'll give you an example. So if I turn off setback, the first diagram, and I go to, I've got the two lines. I got the lines for my actual diagram, and then I got like the paint bucket that I use to fill in. I could also add another effect here, like something like outer glow. So if I go outer glow, and we turn that glow like a red. I could do something like this, where now it looks like that the line types are now like a neon light. Okay, that's an outer glow. I could do it the other way, and I could go turn off the outer glow, but go for an inner glow. And I can go this way, and this time I'd make it white. This is probably a little bit harder. It's harder because it's going through the center of those lines. So I'm not sure what the best approach is. It's not really working for me. Let's stick with the outer glow. I reckon that does look really cool, like this sort of neon sort of looking approach. Now, let's say I wanted to copy this across. So I do have this outer glow here. What I can do is right click on this, and I can say, right click on the layer, and I can go copy layer style. So I can click on copy layer style. I can turn off that diagram. I might turn on my drops diagram, which you can't really see at the moment. And I'm going to go drop down to my diagram, right click, and I'm going to say paste layer style. And immediately I got something that looks like this. And I reckon that looks really cool. So I'll go to my diagram. And it looks something like that. So I got like my final diagram, but I'm still not done yet. I want to use the paint bucket. So I'm going to turn off those effects for now. I'm going to turn off the background. I'm going to turn off everything else. I'm just going to leave this like that because I need to go to my paints layer, turn that off. So paint bucket, and let's go turn that on and turn this into like this blue. Okay. All right, nice. Now I can turn back on my layer style simply by where it says effects, clicking on that eyeball. And I've got something that looks like this now. I can turn on the background, turn on the line work, or I might turn off the line work and just turn on the paint bucket. I have something that looks like this. And that's one of my diagrams. So the important thing is that you just choose a language that works for you. There's no right or wrong. In fact, if I was doing this, it would take me a lot longer. I've got to work out exactly what colors work, what my reds are, what my blues are, create my color swatches, work out how I want my line types to be. Because you can see, like, even without any lines and just leaving it to a black background, you know, that does look pretty good like that. But if I had a paint bucket that had a color overlay and it was a darker, or like a darker red, like this, the black background may look good, or it may be better to have that glow, or it might be better to go to the color overlay and turn that to like a white. So it looks something like that. There is no right or wrong here. It's just going to be a case of experimenting. I'll keep working on this, and you'll see the updates in future classes of where I got to with it. There are a couple of other things that we could add in here, and that's important to note, is that, you know, we want to add any text, any arrows, anything like that. We can add them in Photoshop the same way that we do with any other type of block. If we wanted to add text, you've seen how to do that now as well. But really it just comes down to what your imagination is, and sketching these out is obviously so important, and then modeling as much of that annotation as possible. If you want to put in, like I was mentioning before, the sun diagram or your north arrows or any arrows that show pushing and pulling on your mass, it's better to do that in Rhino in 3D and then just make 2D it out, rather than trying to do it in Photoshop after the fact. But Photoshop is still the best place to do text. The final thing to do, really, like, let's say that was my finished diagram. File, save as. I'll save this as a copy, and I'm just going to save this as a JPEG. And again, using the same naming convention. So this one would be my last diagram. So this would be diagram 06 drops. Yep, that's fine. Go back to my Photoshop, go to my diagram, photo, insert from file, there it is there. Okay, I can make that as big or as small as I like, but the important thing is that as I'm importing them, I'd import them all in the same location and then just copy them from slide to slide. You can see when I go to like a example like this, that's a really clean looking diagram now with very minimal line work other than just using paint bucket colors.